Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum. Tonight we're going to hear from those candidates seeking election to the state representative in the House of Representatives in Concord from the city of Rochester, as well as our state senate candidates from District 6. My name is TJ Jean from Frisbee Memorial Hospital, and I'll be serving as your moderator this evening. This evening will be a great opportunity for voters to hear from the candidates of the House and the Senate as they make their decisions for the upcoming November 6th election. Before we begin, I wanted to thank the government channel of the City of Rochester for allowing us to use their facilities this evening. Also want to thank Tim Kremen of Kremen Creative for taping this evening's event and also making the broadcast available for rebroadcast prior to the election. Also want to thank Atlantic Broadband for broadcasting the Candidate Forum live tonight and for the rebroadcast that will occur several times on Rochester's community channel, Channel 12. We also want to thank Foster's Daily Democrat, the Rochester Voice, and local radio stations that are also providing coverage of the Candidates Forum this evening. As always, we want to thank the City of Rochester for the use of the facilities tonight, and especially City Manager Blaine Cox, who also serves on the Chamber of Commerce Governmental Affairs Council. Just a few upcoming events that we want to mention. On Wednesday, October 24th, the Chamber Business and Community Expo will be taking place at the Rochester Community Center from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., where over 60 businesses will be exhibiting the products that they serve to our community. This is a great opportunity to meet and learn about the wonderful businesses that we have here in the greater Rochester area. The event will also include a taste of the chamber, with several restaurants providing samplings of their food offerings, many door prizes, and a grand prize of $500. Then on Friday, November 30th, the annual tree lighting ceremony will take place at Central Square here in downtown Rochester from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. This event is underwritten by Frisbee Memorial Hospital and will include caroling, dance performances, hot chocolate and cookies, cookie decorating, caroling, dance performances, and a photo booth. We'll also have a very special visit from Santa Claus himself. The Chamber will also be holding a collection of children's items to benefit the children at the Homeless Center of Stratford County. So if you have any gifts that you wish to contribute, we certainly encourage you to drop them by at the Chamber office on Main Street. Then on Sunday, December 2nd, will be Rochester's Holiday Parade, which will begin at 3 p.m. and travel through downtown Rochester, displaying floats, marching bands, and once again, a visit from Santa Claus. This is underwritten by Service Credit Union, and the theme of this year's parade is Christmas Around the World. So for more information on the holiday tree lighting or the holiday parade, please contact the Chamber office at 332-5080. All right, next I'd like to introduce to you those seeking election to the House of Representatives for the City of Rochester. Starting with District 7, we have our incumbent representative, Representative Tim Fontenot. Seated next to him is City Councilor Elaine Lauterborn for District 9. Then we have for District number 11, Representative Chuck Grassi. Next to him for District 10 is Amy Can. Next to Amy for District 24 is Jeremiah Minahan. And for District 22 we have Peg Higgins. District 7 we have Ms. Pam Hubbard. And in District 12. See, there we go. District 12, Representative Pam Hubbard. Then District 8, we have Donna Ellis. Over to my right for District 23, Sandra Keynes. Also District 23, Dawn Lehman. District 24, Representative Brandon Finney. District 10, Representative Jody McNally. And District 11, Sue DeLamus. District 9, Representative Steve Bowden. And District 12, Mr. Mac Kittredge. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. It also gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our esteemed media panel tonight. Joining us from Foster's Daily Democrat is Mr. Kyle Stucker. From the Rochester Voice, we have Mr. Harrison Thorpe. And from WTSN 98.1, Mr. Dave Andreessen. Good evening, gentlemen. All right, our official timekeeper this evening is Mr. Matt Bollier of Service Credit Union. He will display the timer on the monitors beside you. I want to remind everyone that the opening remarks will be 2 minutes long. Once the timer has rung, I ask that you please conclude the sentence that you are speaking immediately, and we'll move on to the next candidate. Because time is of the essence, we do want to keep things moving, so once your time does expire, if you could please conclude your remarks, greatly appreciate it. If we have to ring the bell twice, then at that point, the microphone gets muted. They won't hear you at home, unfortunately, so please conclude your remarks at that time. All right. We are ready to go, so we will start with our opening remarks, and we'll start at this end of the table with Representative Tim Fontenot to begin.
Thank you very much, TJ. Thank you for moderating today. Thank you to the Chamber for putting on this event and for everybody who's attending this evening. My name's Tim Fontenot. I live in Rochester, down on Sullivan Farm Drive off of Salmon Falls Road. I consider myself to be a Rochester guy. I've lived here really the better part of the past 50 years. I graduated from Spalding High School, went through the school system here, and I now have grandchildren in the school system here. So I live in Rochester, I work in Rochester, I own property in Rochester, so I'm pretty invested here, and I care a lot about what happens with our city. I am currently just finishing my first 2-year term with the House of Representatives in New Hampshire. I served on the Commerce Committee for the past 2 years, and that involves business, banking, insurance, and the Liquor Commission. And it's been an extremely rewarding experience, I'll tell you that. Serving in the House of Representatives is very, it's a very rewarding and interesting experience in New Hampshire. It's very historical. So people always, a lot of people have asked me, what are your goals here? What do you come to this, what bills do you want to present? What do you want to change when you get to Concord? And I really said, I came into this really with an open mind. I don't have a predetermined agenda. I came here thinking that I would like to represent the residents, the constituents of my district, and just bring a voice of reason. I've also served in Rochester on the planning board for, I lose track, about the past 18 years, and I've always liked to think of myself as kind of down the middle of the road. I like to try to bring a reasonable approach to whatever situation is in front of us, and I try to do the same thing in Concord. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Fontenot. Councilor Lauterborn.
Thank you, TJ. Good evening, Chamber members, fellow candidates, and members of the viewing public. It has been 10 years since I served as a state representative. Although it was a great honor to serve, I never expected to run again. I am doing so now to provide one more voice to try to prevent the continual erosion of both the municipal and school revenue to our local community. As a longtime city councilor representing Ward 2, I have seen how decisions made at the state level can have a negative effect on local communities. If elected, my mission will be to vote for bills that are beneficial to Rochester, the Rochester schools, and Rochester taxpayers. I will oppose bills that are not in our best interest. Specifically, I will oppose downshifting costs to the local property taxpayer. There are other issues that are important to me and may be important to you. In general, as a state representative, I will support policies that provide small business, so important in Rochester, with the environment they need to grow and prosper. I will also support quality public education with my votes. I will support bills that encourage access to quality, affordable health care for everyone. And I will support maintaining the beautiful environment that we all cherish in New Hampshire. I ask for your vote on November 6th so that I can do my part to see that New Hampshire retains those qualities that make this state such a great place to live. Many thanks to the Chamber and the media for providing this forum.
Thank you, Councilor. Representative Chuck Grassi.
Thank you, TJ. My name's Chuck Grassi. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Rochester, And I've also served on a number of other boards and commissions here in the city, being the City Council and Planning Board. This year, this past session in the legislature, I had one distinction that not too many people, in fact, no one else up here can claim. I had perfect attendance and 100% voting record for my constituents in Concord this year. That's something that's very rare, and it does take a lot of work. As well as having 100% attendance, I served on the Resources, Recreation, and Development Committee, working on environmental issues. One of the important things that we dealt with this year was the testing at our wastewater treatment plant, something that could add millions of dollars, if not corrected, to the water rates and sewer rates here in the city of Rochester. And we were able to shepherd a bill through my committee, which helped reduce the requirements for the testing, and hopefully the ratepayers will see that as a benefit. Also worked on emerging pollutants in our communities and reducing arsenic in our water. One of the things we have is Rochester, in fact New Hampshire, has the largest incidence of pediatric cancer in the nation, and we have to address those issues. I served on the Children's Caucus, and I've also voted against issues that would increase the taxes for the city of Rochester, basically not making significant cuts to the education portion of our budget. One bill that I opposed would have cut $2 million from Rochester's education budget. This is something that we cannot do, and we need people there who are going to be there and vote and support the citizens of Rochester to be concerned about our tax rate and about the issues that are important for our children and our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Next, we will hear from Miss Amy Can of District 10.
Hi, everyone. So I bought my house in 2003, and my daughter was born in 2006, and she's been in the school systems here since then, and I'm proud to be part of Rochester, and I expect to stay here, and I'm immersed in the community. I've been on the Rochester Youth Soccer Board for the past year. I've been coaching at RISA, which is Rochester Youth Soccer Association, for the past 6 years, also on several other nonprofit boards, and the president of my own consulting company. And we work with companies trying to make sure that they're safe workplaces for everyone, they can hire good people. And I see the struggles that businesses are having that perspective. The last 20 years in my career, basically, I've been in the business field, and now I have my own business as a business owner, so I see both sides of it. For me, there's 3 things that are really important, and education is number 1. Number 2, it's growing our economy, which ties very much into education. And also it's environmental protections. I've been dismayed to see some of the bills shot down right now, and I don't know all the background. I can tell you I'm fairly new to this. But I can tell you that PFCs are really important chemical compounds that should not be in our water, and there's not the proper testing for them right now. So what I find as a business owner, when I think about where I want to go and where I want to grow my company, I think about a couple things. I think about the skilled workforce that's there. Are they going to be able to meet future technology needs? Are they going to stay in New Hampshire? What kind of economy am I walking into? What kind of infrastructure is happening out there? And what kind of environment am I bringing my employees to and staying there in my business? Are they going to have clean water, clean air, energy? Those are all 3 so immersed, integrated issues that I find that we really need to prioritize. Granted, there are certainly other issues. The opiate addiction is a huge problem, and that's also a very big detriment for businesses to come to New Hampshire right now. New Hampshire is, I think, 3rd worst in the whole country as far as opiate abuse and deaths per capita. And that's very much a detriment to companies to come to New Hampshire. They also see our education system not where it needs to be, and that's also another detriment. People have talked about reducing corporate business taxes. I, as a business owner, would love that, in theory.
Thank you very much. I know that bell comes quick.
Yeah, I should have kept an eye on that.
All right, before we get to candidate Minahan, I do want to mention we will actually be having audience questions for the state rep portion. So if any of the studio audience members wish to fill out a card, you can do so now. We'll probably only have time for just a few questions, but we wanted to provide people that opportunity for this forum as well. All right, next we have Mr. Jeremiah Minahan of District 24.
Thank you, TJ, and my thanks to the Chamber for organizing this great forum. My name is Jerry Minahan. I'm a longtime Rochester resident, and over the years I've been involved in community activities, scouting, library trustees, and the Opera House. As I've gone around and talked to people at their homes, I've gotten to not only know them, but also know the issues that are important to them. And the major issues that I'm concerned about are, of course, the economy, education. We need to provide good education for all of our students, good health care opportunities, and as was mentioned earlier, I'm especially concerned about what's happening at the state level where financial responsibilities get pushed down to the city and town level. The downshifting, I think, is a great concern. If elected, I can't promise that you would agree with all of my votes, but I can promise that I would be in Rochester or Concord or wherever to listen to people, to get their ideas on what's important to them, and push for issues always that help the city and oppose issues and policies that hurt the city. Rochester's on the move. I think we have tremendous opportunity in this city, but I also think, of course, as mentioned, and as we all know, we have many difficult issues to deal with, whether it's the opioid crisis, homelessness, income inequality, and so on. But I would ask for your vote. Certainly consider me for election. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we move to District 22 and candidate Peg Higgins.
Hi, everyone. I'm a first-time candidate for our state legislature, and I'm running to represent Wards 1 and 6 in Concord. My opponent has served 2 terms in the legislature, and during his tenure as our representative, I haven't always agreed with the way he voted, and I feel that we need a different voice in Concord. In making my decision to run, the first thought that entered my mind is, how am I qualified to replace him? This made me think back to my experience teaching in Rochester. While working at Chamberlain Street School and the Gonick School, I became familiar with many Rochester families and learned about the challenges that we all face. I learned that Rochester citizens are mostly concerned about our families. We all want well-funded schools, jobs that pay a livable wage, affordable health care, and good and reliable job training. I want to support our families through legislation that will help us to achieve these goals. So I filed. Since then, I have educated myself on many issues that face our state. In the process, I have sought out experts who have been willing to help me with this challenge. If elected, I will continue to seek out individuals who have experience with different issues. As I've been knocking on doors and attending neighborhood run meetings, I have learned what is on people's minds. I've heard loud and clear that there's great concern over the opioid crisis here in our town and the effects that this problem has on our families and our neighborhoods. I've heard about the impact that a gun range near a neighborhood has impacted the quality of life. I want to take neighborhood concerns to Concord and give these Rochester residents a voice in the state. Should I be lucky enough to be elected to represent Wards 1 and 6 in Concord, I will be a representative who will listen to all sides of an issue. I will educate myself on the issues and will vote for what is best for us here in Rochester. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Representative Pam Hubbard of District 12.
Thank you very much. A brief bio, 72 years and 2 minutes. It's hard to do. I moved to Rochester in 1971, newly married. My husband was a grad student at UNH. I started my career at Spalding High School. I had taught 3 years in Miami. I finished my teaching career after 32 years at Spalding. I retired after 35 years of teaching because I had students, and then I had their children, and I wanted to leave before I had Meme and Pepe. And after I left, I went to the school board, and I served 4 terms on the school board. I served 3 different terms at the State House, 2006, 2008, 2012. I have since been on the Library Trustee Board since 1998, and the chair since 2005. I'm on the board of the Auxiliary for Frisbee Memorial Hospital, where I currently serve as chair. I have tried to do things for my community because I believe that's my responsibility. I think what I bring to the table is a halfway decent intellect that I try to use, and I have learned very early from teaching, a lot of times you need to keep your mouth shut, your ears open, and your mind open. And I think those qualities are ones that I will take with me to the State House, as I have before. When I was in the State House, I served on Resources, Recreation, and Development. I learned more about water purification than I knew was possible to even know in the first place. My three biggest issues, of course, would be education, because I devoted my life to it. My second biggest issue is the issue of health care, because working on the Frisbee board and also working on a state board for the auxiliaries has taught me the problems that health care has in our troubled times. And the third thing I'm concerned about is the environment, because my husband is an ardent environmentalist, and if I didn't include this, I would not dare to go home tonight. I thank you all for the opportunity to speak. Good night.
Thank you very much. Next, we move to District 8 candidate, Miss Donna Ellis.
Thank you for having me. My husband and I have lived in Rochester approximately 30 years. We both worked in various jobs around the area, and a lot of them have closed, so we've seen the economy wiggle a lot. And my husband's son and him work in Rochester, and his son went to the area schools. I'm currently a state rep, and I'm on the Environmental and Agriculture Committee, and I'm interested in clean air and waters and food, and especially due to the fact that my daughter passed away from cancer. Excuse me. I would like to keep involved in environmental issues by voting for bills that come up, especially like when the big chemical companies came to New Hampshire and thought they were just going to have bills that would cause us to have to put chemicals on places like daycare centers where toddlers play. And I also voted to try to clean up the Coakley landfill, and so that is kind of my concern, to keep the families healthy. I'm also concerned about their education, and also, you know, keeping Rochester taxes low, and I guess that's it.
Very good. Thank you. Next, we move to District 23 and State Representative Sandra Keynes.
Thank you. I'm a native of Rochester. I was graduated from Spalding High School and the University of New Hampshire with a BA in government. And I've been fortunate enough through these few years to represent you both as a state representative and as a city councilor. And I'd like to tell you why I think that dual role is very valuable. When you go to Concord, you're faced with approximately 1,000 bills that are being introduced. And if you don't have any idea of the impact on those on your local level, you're in serious trouble. And since 2009, the state legislature has been shortchanging the cities and towns. And my guess is that here we are due probably somewhere between $8 and $12 million for the last few years. And if the state had paid us what it owes us, then for stabilization and school building aid and the retirement system, just to name a few, we probably would not have had the debate at tax time over overriding the tax cap. Unfortunately, since the recession, the state has taken a basket full of schemes, thrown them up in the air, and given tax cuts and doled them out to private companies and individuals without any studies to project the long-term effects on the state budget. The results have not produced substantial revenue growth, and in some cases, losses. So faced with shortfalls, guess what? The state has kept the money due to the cities and towns. Now, every community is essentially facing the same issues we are here. When the state needs the money for paving, they tell you, oh, that road that rides through Rochester, that's now a local responsibility. And when there's a shortfall in the retirement system, they say, well, yeah, there's a shortfall, but let the cities and towns make it up. We're not going to put our share in. So all of these costs add up at the local level and on your local property tax bill. Because as we know, there's only one place for cities and towns to get their money, and it's the property tax. The state has many other options.
Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from District 23 candidate, Mr. Don Lehman.
Thank you very much, TJ. My name is Don Lehman, and I am residing at Briar Ridge Estates here in Rochester. I held this seat from 2015 and 2016, and quite frankly, it's my wife who convinced me to run for this office once again. I'm happy to do so. My major issues of which I am concerned, number one, the economy. I think the importance of creating private sector jobs, as many as possible, would be a significant step towards keeping New Hampshire on a solid financial platform. I served for 2 years in the Ways and Means Committee, which is not an easy committee to get on, but it was my major in economics that allowed me to function with that committee. We learned a lot, and we learned that there's ways to go about getting solutions to these problems. One of the first things we do when we take the oath of office is we swear an oath to the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire and of the United States of America. I will not vote for any bill that is unconstitutional in either case. I have seen bills that go there that skirt the edge. I'm not going to talk about them now because I don't think that's necessary. But I made a promise 4 years ago, I made a promise 2 years ago, and I'm making the same one today. Any bill that has a new or increased tax or fee, I will vote no. I do not believe that the State House has the right, or I as a legislator would have the right to reach into my neighbor's pocket, pull money out of his pocket to give it to somebody else over here who may or may not need it. He has that right to do that himself. But do I have that right to force him to do it? No, I don't believe so. So economics and taxes, growing the economy, those will be my strong points. Thank you, and I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. Next, we move to District 24 and Representative Brandon Finney.
Thank you, and thank you to the moderator, our sponsors, and the media panel tonight, and thank you all for being here. I think my one claim to fame is that I might be the youngest guy here, so I got that going for me, I suppose. I spent the last 2 years, really focusing on transparency and accountability in state government. I think it's really important that we all are accountable to our constituents here, and that everything that we do is made public. So I've made a concerted effort to put everything that I do on social media and on a site, and I've made the rounds trying to bring back the old town hall type of things and invite people to come and talk about the issues. I spent the last 9 years in the National Guard, of which I am still currently serving, and as far as I know, I think I'm the only member of the House that is still in the military on the National Guard side. So I have an interest in the military issues. So I have served on that committee, State Federal Relations and VA. And in that process, I've learned a lot about the process of putting in a bill, talking about the merits of the bill, how it is going to either grow government or not grow government, and how we're going to spend money. And I think that we've done a pretty good job, at least in my committee, of at least trying to provide some of that transparency with how we deal with the veteran community, especially, and our kind of relationship with the federal government. Going forward, I want my second term in office to really focus more about the individual freedoms that we already enjoy in this state, but we can go even further and expand that. So where we have a lot more of our freedoms that are protected from the state as well as by the state, and all the votes that I have in the last 2 years have also reflected a need for fiscal responsibility as well. I also do not believe that we need to be in the business of increasing taxes and the tax burden, especially in this city when it already is one of the highest in the state. I want to look further. Oh, dang it! Sorry.
You guys are doing great. Thank you, though. Appreciate that. Next, we will hear from our District 10 candidate, Representative Jody McNally.
Good evening, everyone. I'm currently serving in my first term at the State House on the Criminal Justice Committee. And let me tell you, I have never really served in government before, but it has been a learning experience for me, and it has been an honor We pretty much cover everything that's illegal in the state, so it's a lot of fun. It's very busy. But let me tell you a little bit about my life. My husband and I are New Hampshire residents, have been our whole lives. My husband was born and raised in Portsmouth. He was active duty for 22 years in the Marine Corps, so every 3 years we move, so I've had a lot of experience in a lot of different states. I'm a retired teacher. I've also taught in many states. Education is near and dear to my heart. I actually put in to be on the Education Committee and see where I ended up on criminal justice. But having said that, we have 3 children who graduated from New Hampshire schools. I have 3 grandchildren that are currently in Rochester schools, and 2 pretty soon to graduate, a junior and a senior. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know I am probably one of the most conservative candidates up there. I'm a constitutional conservative. I'm pro-life. Like I said, education is very important to me. Small businesses and the economy are dear and dear to my heart also. I also like to be fiscally responsible. There are a lot of ways and a lot of different things that we can do. I don't always vote with my party. I consider myself a little bit on the conservative side, independent side, but I do love Rochester. I believe in our motto, live free and die. I think there are a lot of things we can work together. Having been the only female Republican from Stratford County for 2 years, it's been a lot of fun, but a lot of work because I was kind of like on my own. The guys are not a lot of help, let me just tell you that. So, Brandon sits right in front of me at the State House, but anyway, you don't need to know that. I guess that's about all I want to say. I am excited to try it again. I said 1 term and I'm done, but I have truly learned and been educated so much about everything to do with this state, this city, and I love our country, and I just want to make New Hampshire great again.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from District 11 candidate, Ms. Sue DeLamus.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you, everyone, for having us and hearing us out tonight and seeing who it is that you would like to vote for most. I want to start just by reading something that Daniel Webster wrote, and because I feel a lot that I really resonate with this. I'm committed to the Constitution of the country, and I'm committed against everything which, in my judgment, may weaken, endanger, or destroy it, and especially against all extension of executive power, and I am committed against any attempt to rule the free people of this country by the power and the patronage of the government itself. The constitutions, and the New Hampshire Constitution is the best, by the way, and actually had a lot to do with our national constitution or federal constitution. It limits government. And I hear a lot of people talking about, what we're going to do and how many bills we're going to put in and how we're going to vote. I'm very conservative. I'm a constitutional conservative. I want to limit government. I want to see regulations cut as much as possible. Our economy right now is great. We have so many jobs, we don't even have enough people to fill those jobs. That's one of the things I think we really need to concentrate on is getting more people to come to work, to stay in the state, which would include possibly coming up with better ways to get people for their housing and things like that. I have consistently voted for small government, low taxes. I'm not interested ever in a state income tax. I live in Rochester now. I've lived in Rochester since 1995, but I've grown up. I guess I'm a free stater. I was born in Vermont and moved to New Hampshire by my New Hampshire native parents when I was, I think, 8 months old. So I've been here since then. I grew up in Laconia. Right now, well, that was so fast.
That was quick. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Vote for DeLamus.
Next, we move to District 9 and Representative Steve Bowden.
Thank you, TJ. As TJ said, my name's Steve Bowden. I'm the 3rd term incumbent representing Ward 2 in Rochester. Over my 6 years in the State House, I've been assigned to the executive departments and administration. And the ED&A committee oversees licensure, rules, regulations, and most importantly, the New Hampshire retirement system, amongst other things. During this time, because I've spent my lifetime as a tradesman, I've kind of fallen into the role of being an expert on codes, and I've been lucky enough to chair at least 3 committees, subcommittees reviewing the codes. What I've achieved in that is we've actually stopped new code adoptions. The energy code, for instance, would have added about $15,000 to the cost of building an average home, and that would have been a mandatory cost. So that was a big thing, especially with the cost of affordable housing in New Hampshire, or lack of it. There was a big step forward in trying to stem that increasing cost. I just recently chaired a study committee on the code adoption process, and this bill came forward as a result of what we've done in the past, and we've discovered that the code adoption process in New Hampshire was really pretty bad. Nobody understood what the codes would do, how much they would cost, and whether there was even a need for it. We met 6 times over this past summer for over a dozen hours with well over 20 people that testified, and we've come to a consensus in that committee to completely revamp the process that we use to adopt new codes in New Hampshire. Out of that committee, we will be introducing 5 bills this fall that will change the entire process that's used, and that will lead to a better understanding on the legislature's part to determine whether or not these codes are indicated. So I'm hoping I'll have your support this fall so that I can go back to Concord and complete my work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from District 12 candidate, Mr. Matt Kittredge.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you to the city and the press for coming, and for you who are attending. My name is Matt Kittredge. I am currently the selectman from Ward 5. Prior to that, my service for the city included being the city councilor from Ward 6 for a while, which I found a very interesting and very illuminating process. When I was a child, my family had a slogan. It was TANSTAFL. That's an acronym for there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. There was no such thing as a free allowance. Go out and shovel snow, mow lawns, and at 13 I had my first Social Security card as a clerk in a drugstore. I've worked all my life and I've lived in Rochester for about 40 years. My last full employment was as an electrical contractor. As such, I volunteered my time and helped Habitat for Humanity build 2 houses, one here in Rochester. In my family, you see a problem, you step up and you help solve it. You don't walk by problems. When I walk to the supermarket and I see something on the ground, I pick it up and put it in the trash. It is not a sacrifice, it's the way I was brought up. So why am I running? Well, I have a bugaboo, if you will, and that is bureaucracy. I think we have terminal bureaucracy. We have a tremendous amount of law and regulations, and it is more of a handicap and a set of leg irons than it is a source of safety and progress for us. So if I go to the legislature, you will see a strict constitutionalist, a paleo Republican, and a man that does not believe in reaching into his neighbor's pockets for money when he can pitch in himself and see something done. We are a volunteer nation in America, and that is why I am here. And also because politics is fun. You meet the nicest people.
Thank you. All right, well, that will conclude the opening remarks portion of this forum. We will now transition to our media questions, and we will start with our first question from Mr. Dave Andreessen of 98.1 WTSN.
All right, thank you, TJ. New Hampshire is one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, yet many businesses say they can't fill every position because they don't have enough qualified candidates. Is there something that the legislature can do to address this?
And we will start with Mac Kittredge.
I believe there is. One of the things that ties up a lot of time in businesses is paperwork. You may have noticed that there's a big growth of hospitals. They're not putting in a lot of new beds, they're putting in a lot of offices to deal with paperwork from the state and from the federal government. If you want to have more people out there working, doing something that adds to the economy rather than shuffling papers, that's how you go about it. When I was a kid, you went to a doctor, there was a doctor and his nurse, and he did his paperwork next to his flapjacks on Sunday morning. You walk into a doctor or a chiropractor's office today, there are 3 people for every practitioner. You are paying for that, and it is one of the major driving costs of healthcare and our civilization itself. If I go to Concord, I will do my best to take that load off your back and off the back of our business people. Thank you.
TJ, can I just to phrase that question again, it's some businesses are saying that they don't have enough qualified candidates to fill these positions, mainly tech, manufacturing. What can the legislature or what can the state do to attract qualified candidates to fill these jobs in such low unemployment?
You want to give 30 seconds, please, Matt? So, Matt, to that point, do you want to answer
Yes.
specifically?
One of the things we can do in school is I'm a great admirer of Dean Kamen and the FIRST program for bringing robotics. We have every reason to bring robotics in New Hampshire, and it would be more or less the Olympics for nerds, if you will, instead of just athletics as being a place where our youth can put together everything from business to mechanics to computers and so forth. If we want more people that can do it, we want our youth to stay in New Hampshire, then I say train them and make it fun. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Representative Bowden.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to speak a little bit from personal experience because my son was a graduate from UNH, and when he went out job seeking, not only was he unable to find a good enough paying job in New Hampshire, but the cost of housing was another big consideration for him. And I think that is a consideration. I think that's something the legislature has a direct control over. The affordable housing is a huge problem in this state, and that's exemplified by the fact that we have a drive to build workforce housing and more subsidized housing. If housing costs weren't an issue, we wouldn't need those things. So going back to my position on codes, that's something that we can do, is stem the enaction of new codes that drive up the cost of housing. As I stated before, $14,000 to $15,000 just for the energy code. That translates directly to the purchase price of any new home. So that's something we can definitely do. We can keep in check in Concord. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lamus.
Yeah, I think the affordable housing is a big problem, but government doesn't create jobs, you know. Capitalism, people looking for candidates to work for them need to incentivize with, I think, maybe higher pay without needing to have a mandated pay for people who are looking for jobs. But as far as finding candidates, I would think that we would want to try to invite families from other states to come and move to New Hampshire and make the education system a little bit more robust in having tech schools. We have a satellite school, I think, off of Spalding right now that teaches kids technical, gives them training at the high school level and not just as a secondary college where they go from high school and then go to a tech. So I think that there's a lot of hands-on jobs. People need people to cut their lawns and trim their trees and do all that kind of stuff, and a lot of people are not going into that.
Thank you. Representative McNally.
I agree, too. I think housing has somewhat to do with it, but I also like the technological programs that I went to the Somersworth School. It's just amazing. I know we're still building the one here, but having kids being able to graduate, not have to go to college and get in debt for their whole life and can go right to work. I have heard many times that the average age in New Hampshire of a contractor now is like 55. And the young kids are wanting to go to college, and they can't afford to go to college. And there's so many things that they can do at the high school level if there's the ability for that, and get out of school and go right to work. Then if they want to go to college, you know, maybe the business will pay for it, or they'll have the money. They won't be in debt. So I think that's a really big part of it, is the education part. I also think that New Hampshire sometimes with the taxes on businesses, like I know we have plenty of jobs and stuff, but I think by lowering business taxes, we have the opportunity for more revenue, for more businesses are going to want to come into New Hampshire, they're going to hire more employees, and they can also give their people more wages.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Representative Finney.
Thank you for the question. I will be the one to harp on trades. Trades. I work in HVAC controls as a full-time job, and I come from a background of an electrician in the military. I spent the last 9 years doing that. I've got a lot of experience in that field. Instead of saddling kids with debt, going to college to get an education in something that they can't get into the workforce with, we should be getting into the habit of telling kids that we need them to get a license to be a plumber and electrician. We need HVAC control people. We need HVAC people in general. We have an aging population in New Hampshire, and it's really hard to keep up with replacing them. We need to keep college graduates in New Hampshire. And I don't think it's the role of the state to control the wages of private industries. I think that if the company wants to increase the wages based on their profits and whatnot, that's their the right to do so. It's not the role of our state to control the the market in New Hampshire.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you, TJ. I have always felt I can be flexible when it comes to legislative issues, and the creation of jobs is one place where we need flexibility. I very definitely favor the creation of private sector jobs instead of government jobs. 4 years ago, we had a casino bill in front of the legislature, and in fact, it was right in front of the Ways and Means Committee. And our committee was split right down the middle, and I was opposed to the bill originally. One of the leaders of the committee asked me why and explained the problems that charitable gaming has had in states where casinos have gone in. He said they might be able to resolve that with an amendment. 2 days later, he walked in with an absolutely brilliantly written amendment. And I told him, if you get this amendment in, I will change my vote and support this casino bill, because it would also lead to the creation of 4,000 private sector jobs without the spending of 1 penny of taxpayer money. That was a win-win situation for all, and I supported it, and we wound up putting it on the floor of the House.
Thank you. Representative Keynes.
Thank you. Well, I think the state has to step up, frankly, and when you repeal the minimum wage, and so that you have one that only matches the federal government, which is $7.25 an hour, it does not put out the right message, either on the websites or any place else. I know all of you are going to say, but there's no company paying the minimum wage. It doesn't matter. It's what the state's position is, and that's what people that are looking to come to New Hampshire or stay in New Hampshire are seeing. The other thing is, where the state should have stepped up, they cut $4 million, as you might remember, out of our Credo technical school up here. 2 programs were very much crimped. 2 programs that local businesses had requested increases in. So whose responsibility is it? The state has to put out an image that they are open for business, and I don't think right now they are.
Thank you. Representative Ellis.
I've been thinking that qualified conditions, that would be like Saffron, having the technical school train people and then hire them. They should have more companies, and the state should work with them to get more of these programs so that people will be trained for a job, and also they have a high school classes that are college level that helps them get out of college sooner and reduce their college debt. They get college credit for taking college courses while they're in high school. I think that's a good program, and more of that would help. That's all.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Representative Hubbard.
I think that where the state might be missing the boat is not taking full advantage of the fact that we have a whole series of junior colleges or other schools, such as Great Bay. Saffron did exactly that. They came into the community, they said, here's what our business does. We have specialized training. We all know that no matter what kind of training we get, in whatever field you go into, if it's at all technological, within a year or 2, you're going to be obsolete. What you need is this constant training. And so I think by partnering the business with the state, with the school systems, both secondary and anything that follows, we could be able to train workers for specific jobs And I think that would be an enormous help. They would have the skills, they would need to step right into those jobs because the jobs would say, this is what you need to know. As far as housing, that's another matter. It is an issue here, and I don't pretend to have the answer to it. I just know that I couldn't afford to move here now as I could when I started here. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins?
I think there's a lot that the legislature can do to attract young professionals to New Hampshire, starting with fully funding education. People coming here, families coming here want good quality education for their children. I think we need to keep our good jobs, training skills, schools up and going, and keeping quality people to be employed. Affordable wages. We need to be able to, people coming here need to be able to live, so we need to have affordable living wages for them. Also, I would include quality childcare. People with bringing in young children need quality childcare so that they can work. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan?
Well, to answer the question, I think that it does start with education. I think that the state, as much as it can, needs to support strong schools so that communities can support strong schools, so that businesses that want to move to New Hampshire can see that they will have at either the elementary, high school, junior college, trained workers that will help them maintain, start, and grow their own businesses. There are some other areas, too. I think that, for example, areas that might help families in particular, things such as the family medical leave would be helpful. I think that also any way the state can support any health care options, health care that families could use and need. And I guess the bottom line is, the question always should be, how can we attract new workers to New Hampshire? How can we keep them?
Thank you. Next for District 10, Ms. Can.
So it's a supply and demand issue. It goes back to the fact that there's a lot of demand right now for workers, and you talked about driving more businesses here. There's already a shortage, so it's not going to attract businesses. What's going to attract them is having a strong supply of workers. And I can tell you from a business perspective, there's two problems right now. The opiate crisis is taking a lot of people out of the workforce. They're not able to work. They might want to, they can't. They can't meet the attendance requirements. They're ill. They can't do it. And the second problem is a lack of trained people. And there's an academic, advanced technology and academic center in Rochester that's not currently funded. It's the only New Hampshire community college system that's not funded. I'm not sure why that's the case, why that's happened, what the history is. I can tell you that Rochester, the economic group here, I'd love to see that funded because it's a crucial part to developing a workforce so that they're available for workers to hire. That's the biggest problems I see from my clients is that they don't have trained workers out there or they have drug problems. We have to fix fundamental issues. One of them comes back to education. The other one comes back to investment in our community, and that takes money. It certainly does.
Thank you. Representative Grassi.
Thank you. I think the question dealt with qualified workers for positions. I'm the only one up here that's actually done something about that. A number of years ago, while I was a member of the City Council, I introduced a program called Project Futures. Sometimes you don't look outside your company for your best workers, but you look inside. And the best worker in your company may be not the guy who's actually running the machine, but the guy who's sweeping the floors, who shows up to work every day on time, comes well-dressed in his uniform, clean-shaven, and he works hard every day, but he doesn't have the skills. What we did is we worked a public-private partnership between the businesses in our community and the municipality, and it didn't cost taxpayers' dollars, local taxpayers' dollars. We used community development block grant monies, matched by monies from industries who were looking for employees. If they had people who worked for them that needed basic skills training in machine trades, in nurses' aides training, in other types of training they had, we helped them with their math skills, we helped them with their language and writing skills, and we put a couple hundred students through that program. This is something that we can do at the state level, and we should be supporting at the state level. And I've already talked with Dan Feltus, Senator from Concord, and we'll be sponsoring a bill with him this next session if reelected.
Thank you. Councilor Lauterborn.
Thank you. As others have mentioned, we need to attract young people to come to this state, and even more, we need to keep the young people that are here from going to school outside the state when they graduate from high school. So what do we need to do? Young families they need jobs, they want a quality environment to raise their family. We have both of those. Plenty of jobs, as you pointed out, more jobs than can be filled. They also want good quality public schools, which is why so many people have mentioned education as a high priority. But we have an unusual situation in New Hampshire with our higher education system. A student graduating from high school in New Hampshire can actually go to a public college, a public university in another state for less money than they can go to our own state university here. Well, when they leave the state and go to school someplace else, they don't always come back. They frequently don't come back. They make a life in that state where they went to school. So we need to find a way to make our higher education system more affordable.
Thank you. Representative Fontenot.
Thank you. I think one of the good things, the good news here is that we don't have to invent this wheel. I think that the research has been done. I've read a lot of studies. There's something called the family-friendly economy, and and there are people working towards it in New Hampshire, and we need to attract the young families to come from other states, but we're in competition. The other local states around us are also trying to attract these young families. What are their priorities? What do they want? They want affordable housing, they want health care, health insurance, they want good school systems and education, and they want child care. So I supported full-time kindergarten in the state this year. I think that was a very important goal. We have this aging workforce in New Hampshire, and we need to be able to replace it with a new young workforce. And we have to work towards their goals. We have to satisfy their needs in order to get them to come here. So it's really go down that list, provide them with what they want, and they will come.
Thank you very much. All right, our next question will be from Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice. And we'll start with Representative Ellis, and we'll work around the left side of the table, and we'll come around this way. So go ahead, Mr. Thorpe.
Washington, Concord, and Rochester have been throwing a lot of money at the opioid problem for quite a few years now. And the devastation that drugs like heroin, fentanyl, and meth wreak on our society shows no signs of slowing down. Can you think of any ways you perhaps fine-tune the enforcement or treatment or any other strategies to combat this scourge to effect a more positive outcome more quickly?
Well, I've seen what the citizens themselves have taken and cleaned up places where drug addicts are using drugs, and I've also, give me a minute. I've been to the SOS meetings. They're all volunteers, so that doesn't cost anything. And we're already doing a lot. The police made the biggest bust around the whole area, I think, not too long ago, of fentanyl. And we just need to do more and more of that, because it's good. What is going on is good. We just need to stay the course and step it up.
Thank you very much. Next, we will move to Representative Hubbard.
I wish there were a simple solution to this problem, because I would be a multimillionaire if I had it. Unfortunately, there aren't any simple solutions. It's a very complex issue, and it's caused by a number of things. I think one thing that's key here is when that person finally reaches bottom and wants help and is looking for help, we have to be able to give that help then, not later. There's a safety net that we need to have that I think we don't have yet, because this caught us by surprise. And as I say, I think we need that. We'd have good law enforcement, and we're treating drug addiction for what it is. It is a disease. It is an illness. And it is something that is devastating our communities. We do have help as far as the hospitals, and I think that all helps. But what it's going to take is time, and it's going to take it's going to take money, because it takes all that drug counseling. And I wish there were an easy solution, but we don't have one. And we need to come up with something, but I sure don't know the answer to that one.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins?
The opioid crisis is a very complicated crisis in our communities. It's not going to be an easy fix. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of money. I would be interested in looking for ways to prevent addiction. If we can use counseling, use intervention, use education to prevent people from becoming addicted. Then those who are addicted, of course, we need a lot more treatment, and we need follow-up to help them recover from their addiction and go on and start a new life. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan?
Well, the opioid crisis, which is serious, critical, and devastating for not only the individuals involved, but also their families, is really a very difficult problem. And as people have said before, and I'm sure will say after me, there are no easy solutions. It's a two-pronged approach, of course. Enforcement is one. I think the police, local authorities, other authorities are doing a great job in terms of trying to combat the sources of the drugs, and also treatment. I think that what we can do and should try to do is aggressively look for funding. We may have federal funding involved, and we need to use that funding properly, carefully, and as quickly as possible. The other issue is we have a lot of volunteer efforts currently dealing with this problem, and I think as much as we can, we need to support those volunteer efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Can?
Again, it's back to supply and demand is the way I look at it. There's three problems here that I see. We need to stop the supply, distribution, illegal distribution. We also need to stop the pharmaceutical companies from pushing all of these painkillers that people are getting addicted to. We need to start from that piece of it. We also need to look at why is the demand happening? Why are people feeling like they need drugs to get through their lives? So perhaps strengthening our health care, our mental health resources, providing opportunities for people to get the care they need before they turn to drugs is a problem. And then third, it's really treating the people that are already addicted. And I think one piece of that is really long-term opportunity for them. Because you hear this before, same thing with people that go to jail, they tend to be repeat offenders. And addicts go through, 3, 4, 5, 6 times sometimes before it actually works for them. So what we need to do is provide infrastructure that allows them to be more successful the first time around, therefore reducing treatment costs, having more success the first time around, and really recruiting them to help other addicts. So it's really a three-prong approach, and as people have noted, it's certainly not easy.
Thank you. Representative Grassi?
Yeah, I think Amy hit on a good portion of it as well. One of the things you take a look at is that you have these people who are relapsing all the time because we're not dealing with the treatment properly. I see a number of problems here, and one of the first things is keeping these kids out of people who get into opioids or to drugs. For the smallest incident with drugs, they can end up with a criminal record. Once you get a criminal record, you can't get a job. Once you can't get a job, you start to begin to lose your dignity. You can't get job training skills because you can't get a loan for education. You can't get housing in many cases. So what we do is, because of the system that we have in place currently, we are creating these problems. We're not solving these problems. We need to have housing, we need to have job training, we need to have a way so that these people can work and regain their dignity so they don't get into this. Private treatment isn't working as well. The private treatment centers that we have, most of the time what they do is they just suck the insurance, throw the people back out onto the street. And the doctors who prescribe this type of medication, they shouldn't be allowed not just to not practice again, they shouldn't be allowed to own practices or being involved in any way in the medical profession.
Thank you. Councilor Lauterborn?
Thank you. Was thinking that a few years ago in Rochester, we really didn't have anything in place to address this problem. Now, our public safety personnel do carry Narcan to save lives, and also they don't just do that, they then steer the people toward resources and try to get them the help they need to change their addictive behaviors. We also have Hope on Haven Hill in Rochester now, a wonderful facility that treats people, and they're expanding. We also have the Peer Counseling Recovery Center in downtown Rochester, which serves many, many people. There's always more that needs to be done. And what I think we need next is, that New Hampshire doesn't really have, is more residential drug treatment centers for those who are ready to seek help for their addiction.
Thank you. Representative Fontenot.
Thank you. The opioid crisis is a difficult thing. It's personal to me. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I lost a daughter earlier this year. So this means a lot to me. I think the answer is education, it's treatment, it's enforcement. We have very short memories. In the 1980s, we had a drug crisis. There were a lot of drug treatment centers around. The crisis went away, the drug centers closed. We were caught with our pants down on this latest thing. We're behind the curve on it. So now we have to catch up. And I think that treatment centers are the answer. We need to educate our young people to stop new addiction from happening. We need to treat the people that are addicted now, and then we need to have enforcement to stop the flow of drugs from coming in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kittredge.
One of the jobs I've held here in Rochester was as a teacher at Spalding in middle school. And I noticed that among the students that I taught, there were some that had not learned to read well. They did not have the kind of family that encouraged their education when they were small. And by the time they sat before me, they were like deer in a headlight, trapped in a cul-de-sac with no exit sign. They didn't see a job. They didn't see a future. I look at this opiate crisis knowing that many of these youngsters know that the drugs they're trying are dangerous, they're unmeasured, the purity is wrong. They're playing Russian roulette with needles and pills, and they know it because they don't value themselves. So if we're going to solve this problem, it is not a government problem, it is a social problem of providing ways of creating self-respect for these youngsters.
Thank you. Representative Bowden.
Thank you, TJ. Over the next 2 years, the federal government will be giving us, the state of New Hampshire, $24.9 million each of those 2 years for drug and alcohol treatment. I think it's important that the state of New Hampshire, and especially the Department of Health and Human Services, exercise good oversight in targeting where that money goes. To that point, the Executive Departments and Administration Committee just recently passed new legislation upping the requirements for certified recovery support workers in the state of New Hampshire, and also recognizing reciprocal licensure for licensed alcohol and drug counselors from out of state and master licensed alcohol and drug counselors from out of state. So I think what we're doing isn't working, but with this $49.8 million we're getting into this state over the next 2 years, if it's properly spent, we might be able to make some headway. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lemus.
I actually had done a little research on that, and I'm glad you brought that up because I could never have remembered those figures. But it is true. One of the things I think that is neglected also is mental health. And I remember when I grew up in Laconia, we had a state school, and it was where people who had mental problems would go and hopefully get treatment. Now, I don't know if that place was a great treatment center, but I think treatment centers are important, and I do believe that that's probably one of the big key issues. And I also have had personal experience. I had a woman who was very close with me, and she died of an overdose of fentanyl, and then her daughter, who I know very well, was coming home a few weeks later, and her father was dead of an overdose with a needle still in his arm. We're talking about adults, not children. This touches everyone. It's a horrible situation, and we do need, it's the treatment centers, I think, we need more facilities for people to help them, because there are a lot of people who need help.
Thank you. Representative McNally.
Thank you. I just want to say thank God for Narcan. I mean, the amount of deaths for drug overdoses has definitely declined from that. I also agree, treatment centers is the problem. The numbers have gone down so much. I heard a story of a guy, a young kid that was in, I think Concord Hospital, 22 days in the emergency room. They had nowhere to put him.
Yeah.
Also, my issue is, after the treatment centers, then what? Let them go through treatment, and then they just go back out and re-offend. So, like the prisons have evolved with education, they have trades there. The guys have something to do when they get out. I think we need to do that, add that on to the end of treatment centers. Also, the education part, and I don't want to run out of time, but I know in 4th or 5th, 6th grade, they have DARE. My husband used to teach it. What do they do in the high school? Do they even talk about drugs anymore? I mean, there's that peer pressure thing, which is the biggest thing, I think, when you get in school. And another thing, quick, a bill we passed with the state police could not arrest people on smaller roads like 20202, only on state highways. So now we passed a bill so the state police don't have to call the local cops, but they can arrest.
Thank you. Representative Finney.
Well, it's hard to answer in a minute, huh? First, I want to, say I'm sorry for the losses that you and Tim have experienced in this crisis, and to that point, we're talking about a public health behavioral issue, not a criminal problem. We need to stop trying to figure out how to keep incarcerating addicts when there's not the focal point of Operation Granite Hammer Shield or whatever it's called now. It's not a program that's going to continue to work in the future. It's not a viable program for the long term. It's a short term solution. And I'll be the only one up here to vehemently support the pardon me, I have a little speech impediment. The legalization of cannabis. I think that it's the most important issue that we need to get done in the state of New Hampshire to allow people to get away from from pharmaceuticals and have a better avenue of getting out of their problem. And I co-sponsored the bill to do that in 2017, and it's still a bill that's still in study committee, and we're still going to work on it on my second term.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you, TJ. My heart goes out to the two people sitting here today who've lost members of their families to drugs. Certainly, as the lady said over here before, there is no simple answer to this crisis, and I don't think there can be a simple answer to such a complex crisis. I have favored in the past, and I will continue to favor the medical use of marijuana if prescribed by a duly licensed physician. Leave it in their hands. But I think that legalizing marijuana as a whole for open use creates another problem. I've seen the research. Anybody can get copies of that research at Dr. Bennett's office. He's shown it to me. And the use of marijuana before age 25, the sooner you start using it, the more it impedes the development of the frontal lobe of the brain. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for sound, rational thinking. This is why we have today people who just don't grow up. And if they don't grow up, they can't make good decisions. So I would stand against legalizing, but certainly in favor of medical use.
Thank you. Representative Keynes.
Thank you. This is not your dad's alcohol problem or your mom's cigarette problem. This is a true disease that has infected these folks. And there are dozens and dozens of studies, and it's not something people like to hear, but there are dozens of studies. The most successful programs are having the addict come in and use Suboxone. This allows them to get rid of the trauma that their body is going through, the pain and the agony. It allows them to keep their jobs. It allows them to go to work every day. But I know a lot of people say, well, you're substituting one drug for another. But it keeps them on a path, a sober path, that allows them to function every day. And it seems to me the Suboxone is well worth it if it eliminates the expense of police, hospitals, and the court system.
Thank you. All right. Our next question will come from Kyle Stucker of Foster's Daily Democrat. We'll start with Representative Keynes, and we'll go around to my right this time.
Rochester and many municipalities have faced their fair share of challenges in terms of education funding. As many of you know, this past June, City Council voted to override the tax cap here in Rochester due to that funding. And, due to some of those challenges. Do you believe the funding system is equitable or inequitable? How would you change it, and how would you do that while simultaneously protecting taxpayers and the interests of students?
Well, I think I've already gone over that. The state owes Rochester $8 to $12 million, somewhere in that vicinity. I haven't checked the numbers lately, but if the state would pay its fair share, we could take care of our mental health crisis, our homeless crisis, and our school situations. We wouldn't have had to worry about an override. So I think it's pretty simple. The state has reneged on multiple promises it has made since, I don't know, since 1960 on what it owes us. It's supposed to, it owes us more on rooms and meals. It owes us more on the business profits tax. They keep cutting and cutting and cutting, and I think you take care of your problems by somebody paying the bill, paying you the money they owe.
Mr. Lehman.
Thank you again, TJ. This is an issue that I've long given thought to about funding for the schools. Certainly, schools are not going to get any less expensive than they are now, and they only threaten to keep going higher. Reliance upon strictly local property taxes, again, is another problem. We look at where the money is actually being spent. Now, I am, for one, happen to love sports, whether it's high school sports, junior high sports, professional sports, doesn't matter. I enjoy all sports. But I think we're spending too much money on so many different sports at the high school level that we could be using that money towards academics, towards history, math, science, etc. And I think that is where our thrust should be. Think about this. In the history of professional basketball, the National Basketball Association, I believe exactly one student from New Hampshire has made a career in the NBA. One out of how many thousands? So we're not talking a lot.
Thank you. Representative Finney.
Thank you. So obviously we have an education funding issue. I'm in this city. We have so many schools to kind of keep funding every year. I have to say that I was not in favor of the tax override. The tax cap override, I think it sets a bad precedence for the future, where if we keep getting to a problem where the budgets aren't being handled properly and responsibly, then we're just going to vote to override the tax cap and keep throwing money at the problem. I think that the big chunk of costs for the schools in this city is administrative costs, and it's not trickling down enough to the students where they can keep surviving every year. So now we're having this problem every single biennium spending year, where we're just going to kind of keep increasing taxes, keep asking property taxpayers to keep footing the bill for that, and we're not getting a better quality education by just continuously throwing money at the problem. It's not a problem that I can answer in a minute, but it's certainly something that we're going to keep striving for.
Thank you. Representative McNally.
I actually have an idea. If I get reelected, I plan to sponsor a bill to have one superintendent per county, depending on the number of students in that county. I actually got the idea from Commissioner of Education for the state, Frank Edelbutt. He suggested it at our 9/12 meeting. And depending on, like I said, the number of students, there could be more than one superintendent. He said this would save millions literally of dollars for education. And I don't think only Rochester has that problem. I taught school. I know it's not the highest paying job, but being a legislator is even less. But it's an honor, and it's a privilege, and I just think it's something that it's a great idea. I don't think teachers get paid enough. I think a lot of money's wasted, but I think that happens in all of business. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lemus.
Thank you. Yes, Frank was very great when he came to the 9/12 and told us about the education system here in New Hampshire. I was on the special committee for education funding I think in 2012. And that we addressed mostly the funds that went for each student. As far as local, that was not something that we were focusing just on each individual student in the state. And what I agreed with the chair of the committee at that time was that each student is allotted a certain amount of money, and that money should follow each student, and those students should be allowed to go to charter schools, private schools, any school that the parent feels is going to help their child get the best education possible. Each child in the state should have the education that they want. And there are funds that are available and are allotted to each child. And I believe that that would help our education system and increase competitiveness so that we'd have better outcome and better educated students.
Thank you. Representative Bowden.
Thank you, TJ. I don't see it as a funding problem. I see it as a spending problem. Rochester has 8 elementary schools. Dover has 5. Dover has more population. We had an opportunity back along to increase the East Rochester School when we rebuilt it in size, and we could have closed at least 1, if not 2, of our other schools. So there was a missed opportunity to save substantial taxpayer money. Also, our school department enters into no-bid contracts quite frequently. There's money to be saved there, but the real elephant in the room is special ed. And I know that right now our students cost about $14,500 per year each to educate. We need to find innovative ways to address our special ed needs without leaving our special ed students out in the cold. So there's another avenue that we could save money at. And lastly, I think that with student-teacher ratios dropping from 12.9 to 12.1, we could get by with just a few less teachers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kittredge.
Yes, I'd like to endorse what Sue DeLayman said about the money following the child. And I'd like to put raise the flag for homeschooling. I met some people that homeschooled their son. He got his high school diploma at 15, got a job, went to the legislature for 2 years, is now working down in Portsmouth for Sig Sauer. Homeschooling costs $1,500 a year. I've looked at the books, I've read the books. If your child can read well, you don't need a whole lot of parental supervision, just a little bit of encouragement. That could save a great deal of money, and it would give a much more individualized education and encouragement to the child. There's a lot to be saved there. We have to think outside the box. We must not think that it's only money and only the legislature that can solve this. We, the people, can. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fontenot.
Thank you. You know, as a legislator, I voted against bills that I felt were going to take money away from the public school system. And one of them was the school voucher bill this year. And the reason, and I'm not against school vouchers, I would support it if the money was not going to come directly out of the public school system. The problem is that the head of the Finance Committee stood in front of us and said that directly the city of Rochester was going to lose about $2 million based on the calculations from that bill. So if we voted in favor of that, instead of a $1.7 million tax cap override, we were going to need a $3.7 million tax cap override. I think Councilor Representative Keynes said it best, that there is funding that is supposed to be coming from the state to offset the school budgets in the cities, and Rochester has been cut short on their share for a number of years. So if I'm in Concord, I'm going to vote in favor of bills that will send the money to Rochester and reduce the property taxpayers' burden.
Thank you. Councilor Lauterborn.
As long as the state reduces funding for education, then the bulk of the school funding is coming from property taxes, way more than in other states. And that will just continue to grow. And as long as the funding is coming from property taxes, there will be an inequity, because across the state, community to community, the property values aren't the same. You could have the same home in Newington, and they'd have a certain amount of that money that would go toward the schools. You could have that same home in Rochester, and they would pay much more in property tax. So there is a built-in inequity in the system, which is especially problematic for the school because so much of the burden falls on the property tax.
Thank you. Representative Grassi.
Yes. I think that, first of all, I'd just like to clear up something. There was a comment that was made that, well, Dover has a larger population, so, you know, what's the problem here? Rochester's a smaller population. We have more kids. We have more children in our schools than Dover has in their schools. So our school department's going to cost more than Dover's school department's going to cost. When you take a look at, you take a look at it from that aspect, and then when people say that it's a spending program and not a revenue program, well, if you're supporting your home and you bring $30,000 a year home to pay your rent and to buy your food and to pay your medical costs and to help your kids out with their clothes, and then all of a sudden your employer comes back down and says, I'm going to cut $5,000 out of your budget, is that a spending problem? That's a revenue problem all of a sudden, because you've got to replace that money. You just can't say, well, I'm going to spend $5,000 less, we're not going to eat this week. One of the things and the biggest burden we had here in Rochester when it came to the tax cap and the override of the tax cap was the 4% reductions for the last 3 years, which my opponent voted for, that cut 4% and cost the city of Rochester money. If we had not have approved those budgets with that reduction in funding, we would not have had to override the tax cap.
Ms. Can.
So we have disproportionately high taxes in Rochester because our home values are low. In Portsmouth, I mean, they're lower tax rates because their homes are valued higher. That's a long-term problem we have to fix. One thing we need to do is invest more in the city to finally start attracting more businesses and individuals and families that can help us prosper. So that's a kind of a long-term problem. But two things that really just horrify me as a parent is school vouchers. For one thing, I don't want to support, it's a violation of my rights and your rights for us to be supporting religious schools. You're going to take my money out of Rochester and send it to people to take their kids to religious schools or homeschooling, private schools. That's not what my public tax money is for. It's to invest in our community. Next thing is to restart the stabilization aid, because we are not playing in the same field as Portsmouth and other counties. We're not. And we can pretend that we are all the time, but we're not. So stabilization, get more revenue in for the state as well. That's why I'm contemplating marijuana legalization. It's a revenue stream that it's millions of dollars that we need. I'm not saying it's the right way to go. We need to really research it, but it's a possibility.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan.
Well, I think as we've all been talking, the education funding problem is a huge one, particularly for property-poor cities like Rochester, where, as folks have mentioned, the tax needed varies widely by state. I think that, as folks have mentioned before, that certainly one area that could help us quite a bit would be if the state would do its job in terms of the stabilization money and get that to the cities, particularly Rochester, as was originally promised. Two of my 3 children went to parochial school all the way through. My third guy started in parochial school and went to public school. And I say that because I don't believe in vouchers. I think that public school, public funds, education funds, should go to public schools only. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins.
I think that what we need to do is the state needs to come up with the money that is promised to the towns. We are a property-poor town, and so we need some money, some help from them. When you stop and think about earlier question about attracting young professionals, what do they want? They want good, quality, funded education. And I think that one way to do that is to restart the stabilization aid that is slowly being removed. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hubbard.
Thank you very much. I'm a retired English teacher, and of course words fascinate me. And when I went to the State House, I heard the word downshift. Now, the only downshift I knew was a car, and I knew I didn't do it because I'm an automatic person. I don't have a car that downshifts. And then I realized it was a wonderful word that described taking the money and taking the bills and keeping the money and sending the bills down. And I thought, what a lovely term, and how nice if I myself could keep the money and send the bills down, but I have no place to send them. And I think that, quite seriously, that is an issue. When you are funding your education, and I know because I served on the school board, and you are expecting X number of dollars from the state because this is the promised aid, and you don't get it, you're in the same position as the homeowner who finds out that he or she has just lost his job and the mortgage payment is due. You know, you have to be able to count on your revenue source, and I think the state owes it to its citizens to come through with the money that they were supposed to come through with. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ellis.
I agree with Tim Fontenot and Mr. Grassi. The state needs to come through with the money that it promised, especially for the retirees, and then they shifted the money to the citizens, and the taxes go up. And they had a problem funding kindergarten for a long time, full-day kindergarten. And then they tried to get funds from Keno, and it's not enough money. So, I also think that the public money is for the public schools, not private schools. If we give our public schools the money it needs, there will be better schools, and just as well as, and maybe better than any private school.
All right, thank you. All right, media panel, we have time for one more question. So we'll go back to Mr. Dave Andreessen of 98.1 WTSN. And we'll start this time with Representative Fontenot, and we'll go right around.
Okay, on that last question, we heard a lot about recreational marijuana. Is that the answer for the state? Do you support legalizing recreational marijuana? Is that a good revenue stream?
I do support legalizing recreational marijuana. I don't think it's the answer to the state's financial woes. I think it may be one source of revenue funding. I support the legalization for other reasons. I think, you know, I grew up here, like I said, I went to Spalding in the 1970s, and I have, for the past 40 years, thought that it was quite hypocritical of the state to sell 100-proof alcohol through its state-owned stores while arresting people for possession of small amounts of marijuana, which is, in my opinion, much less harmful than the alcohol that comes from the state stores. So that's why I would support the legalization, but, and I would be happy that it is a funding source, but I certainly don't think it's the sole answer to the financial issues.
Next.
Councilor Lauterborn.
I do support legalization, and the reason is prohibition doesn't work. It didn't work in the past, and it's not working now. I certainly would not want to see more people using marijuana, but we already have a lot of people using it, and they're dealing with the black market to get it. They have no idea of the quality of the product that they're getting, which could be, have dangerous substances in it. They're dealing with people who are drug pushers and are probably pushing other more potent drugs, like what we talked about earlier. And I'd like to see that some of that market taken away from the black market. So yes, I say legalize recreational marijuana, regulate it, and tax it.
Thank you. Representative Grassi.
Yeah, I have to agree. I was one of the sponsors of the marijuana decriminalization bill. You know, people have talked about marijuana being an entry-level drug. Well, marijuana itself is not an entry-level drug, and that's been proven. No one has died from an overdose of marijuana as well. But it's an entry-level drug in another way, that it puts people into the criminal justice system. And once you get into the criminal system, because if you've used a marijuana, you smoked marijuana, you got caught, you got thrown into a court system, now you are exposed to, as Councilor Lauterborn has said as well, you're exposed to a different culture. You can't get a job, you can't get a student loan, you have problems sometimes getting housing. It puts you into a situation where you're forced, it pushes you into the drug culture. And that's not what we want to do. I think that it could be a source. All the states around us are doing it. We're going to be the only state, an island in the middle of all of what's going on around us, even in Canada. And it could be a source of revenue as well, and it's something we need to look at. And I do support the legalization of marijuana and the taxation of marijuana as well. I think if we can get it, and we get it out of the criminal realm and into personal responsibilities, we deal with alcohol in this state.
Ms. Can.
So my fellow candidates have mentioned personal freedom, personal choice. This is one of them. It really is. We allow tobacco, we allow alcohol, we know those are harmful. They don't have apparent medical benefits like marijuana does. So that's one thing I struggle with, is the personal choice. Why are we restricting personal choice from people? Second thing is potential revenue stream is enormous. I mean, there's really a benefit there, and we need more money in the state. Let's face it. You know, we really do. We need to really invest in the state, and, you know, you want to be fiscally responsible. Well, one way to do that is to bring in more revenue. So my only concern about it really is police screening devices for people driving. We have it for DUI now, and we need to develop some kind of technology so that people are able to be screened to make sure they're not driving, you know, recklessly. So there's some kind of mechanism there. That's my only concern. I think we need to put that in place before we actually legalize marijuana. But I think it's a valid option for the state.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan.
I do support legalization. I think that to the point of the question, I'm not sure it's going to be a revenue panacea for the state, but it certainly would bring in more revenue. We should regulate it. We should tax it as we do alcohol. And I think mainly we should look at what other states have done, what's been their experience, how have they done it, what missteps can we avoid if we see the track record that other states have done. So I guess the bottom line is we should legalize it, but we should proceed cautiously. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Higgins.
This is an issue that I have to say that I really don't know enough about to have a firm position on it. I would be very interested in learning more about it. I think that I might be interested if it was well regulated. I think that we should look at it as a possible revenue source for the state. But I think also that we have the advantage that many of the states around us have already legalized recreational marijuana, and we can learn from their experiences, what's worked well for them, what problems have come up for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hubbard.
As I said, I was in the State House for 3 different terms, and one of the votes that I was most happy with myself about was voting to legalize medical marijuana. And I always knew that at some point this question would come up. I have never bought the argument that marijuana is a gateway drug any more than I buy the argument that beer is a gateway drink. There's such a thing as addictive personalities. That said, I must admit that I have kind of interesting feelings about legalizing marijuana. As a revenue source, it would be probably quite effective, although not as effective as we think. And as a state, as people have already pointed out, that already has alcohol available at every major highway you come in. There's a big brand-new liquor store. It would be hypocritical to say, well, it wouldn't do. I would have to say that since other states have done it, I would hope that we would learn from their mistakes. And I would probably, yes, vote for legalized marijuana if I thought that we were going to have it regulated properly.
Thank you. Representative Ellis.
I'm against legalizing marijuana because my first husband used it. He was a veteran. I understand he had a lot of problems, but and he was in a graduate school, and everybody in the graduate school was using it, and they did started into using crack cocaine and other things, and you know, you can't drive when you're using it, but they try to, and I'm just very, very against it. And I think that medically it would be good because, like for cancer patients, it would help them with their appetites and things, but just under supervision.
Oh, thank you very much. Representative Keynes.
Thank you. I support the legalization, and with the appropriate regulations. We obviously know how to do that. We've got the most successful alcohol sales in the whole country. But there are several states now that have had this for years. This is not something new that just came down the pike. However, what's new is that all the states around us, Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts, have all now legalized it, and as well as Canada. So we're sitting here as a little island, which says to me we're setting up multiple court, police, and all kinds of other activities that we really don't need to get into. We need to be sensible and common sense and adults about this whole thing and regulate it in an appropriate fashion.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you, TJ. I mentioned before my position is in opposition to the legalization of marijuana. That having been said, the medical evidence does show that prior to age 25, marijuana does have a harmful effect on the development of the brain, specifically the frontal lobe of the brain. Therefore, any attempt to make it legal before age 25 creates problems, and those problems don't go away. If you want to do it after 25, I don't think the problems are as great from what I've been able to read through the various studies. Again, the issue of medical marijuana, I repeat, medical marijuana prescribed by a duly licensed physician, I do support that. Let the doctors take the responsibility for that. That's why they're doctors.
Thank you. Representative Finney.
Thank you. I'm very excited about this issue because it's something I've been doing a lot of public advocacy for. I spoke on the House floor in favor of, or as a co-sponsor of the legalization bill that did pass the House. It does not pass our Senate, and that's been our big hurdle, is getting it past the Senate and getting a governor that will openly support it. We saw in the 1920s how alcohol prohibition created the mob. The drug war from 1960 onward has created drug cartels, and people have died more from the warring factions than from marijuana itself. 88,000 people approximately on average perish from alcoholism. Not one person in history has ever died from cannabis use. We need to get into the 21st century and pass it, not for political brownie points, but for the sake of individual freedom, to have the state butt out of your individual choices and allow you to be an adult and make those choices for yourself.
Thank you. Representative McNally.
Thank you. Absolutely not. I would never vote for legalizing marijuana. New Hampshire's either first or second, and I think Sandy mentioned it in liquor sales, because all the states around us come to New Hampshire to buy it. It's not that we're the big drinkers, it's everybody else. But anyway, I did vote for legalization of cannabis or marijuana for medical purposes. I've just had too many people tell me that it's helped them. I've also volunteered with drug users, and you would not believe the percentage of them that started with marijuana. One of the bills about marijuana that went through Criminal Justice Committee was written in there that if we legalize it, an adult, I think it was 21 and older, can have 6 plants of their own at home as long as they're out of sight. Now tell me that those kids are not going to touch those plants. I'm sorry. I don't get it. So anyway, I've also had friends that have started with that and gone on to other things. So I think there's just more harm than good out of it.
Thank you. Mr. Lemus.
Thank you. I voted for the decriminalization of marijuana in small amounts. So as far as being stuck in a system where you're going into prison because you've got marijuana on you, that's been voted on and passed. Also, I did vote for medical marijuana, which I think is very good. There are plenty of plants and sources for different types of drugs, medications that are beneficial for cancer patients and people who need it for pain, and I know it's good for glaucoma. I was a psych major in college, and I know that THC actually blocks the synapse. So when you've got a firing cell, brain cell, nerve cell, that synapse is blocked with that THC, and that's where the dullness comes from and a number of other symptoms. So I do agree with Representative Lehman that it does negatively affect the frontal lobe and your brain and development.
Thank you. Representative Bowden.
Against it.
Thank you. Representative Bowden.
Thank you, TJ. I support the legalization of marijuana, but I have some reservations. Like Ms. Khan said, there is no good way to screen whether someone's driving under the influence right now. Just simply doesn't exist. So what do? Do we want people driving down the street high as a kite? We don't allow them to drive drunk. We shouldn't allow them to drive high. So I've got a problem with that, and until that question is answered and addressed, I don't think we should really be looking at full-on legalization. The other concern I have is the tax revenue. People talk about it'll be a great source of tax revenue. Well, what's happened in some states, they've looked at that as such a tax revenue that they've taxed it to the point where it's cheaper to buy it on the black market. One of the advantages of legalization would be to eliminate the black market, and like someone else said, get these people away from going to see their local drug dealer. But if you're taxing it beyond the point that the local drug dealer is going to sell it for, nobody's going to go there. So they're still going to end up going to the local drug dealer, and they're still going to be supporting the black market and the underground economy.
Thank you. Mr. Kittredge.
Well, recreational drug use is a complex problem. We were talking about opiate addiction. I don't feel that the state, when it prohibits alcohol or tobacco or marijuana, properly addresses the fact of the unintended consequences, one of which, of course, during alcohol was the mafia and all the booze gangs and so forth. So I am for decriminalizing marijuana. But I also think that we should introduce into our schools at an early age the idea and explanation to our children of the dangers that are involved with it. People ask me, you don't drink coffee, don't drink tea, never drank alcohol, never smoked, never did recreational drugs. Why? Well, I wanted a more exotic way of committing suicide. And I think what we've got to do is couple this with a full court press on educating our children on the dangers of all these drugs, not just marijuana.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one question from the audience that has come in. I would ask if you could try to keep your answer as succinct as possible, and we'll try to maybe put 30 seconds on the clock. Just to go, I know it's hard to do it in a minute, let alone 30 seconds, but I'd like to get this question in. The question reads, state support for school building aid was eliminated nearly 10 years ago during the Great Recession, with Rochester taxpayers left to foot 100% of any construction or renovation project, including to eliminate modular classrooms at 2 of our elementary schools. Do you promise to support reinstating school building aid to assist our neediest communities, including Rochester? We'll start with Mr. Kittredge, and we'll go right around.
Wow. I haven't studied it. I can't answer to it.
All right. Thank you. Representative Bowden.
Thank you, TJ. Actually, no. I think the state, if it has an interest in funding local schools, should have an interest in funding how those schools are run. So I wouldn't support that. I think that our schools are run by our local school board, and they should be funded by our local, with the local taxpayer responsibility in paying for those improvements.
Thank you. Mr. Lemus.
No, I wouldn't. I think that I wanted to see consolidation of certain schools here in Rochester. I think it still could be done. I don't know why there's such an aversion to it, but I think there are other things that can be done.
Thank you. Representative McNally.
I wouldn't support that either. I gave an idea before about having one superintendent per district, and I think if we could pass that, that would solve the problem. Go into education, all the money.
Thank you. Representative Finney.
I think the easiest way to improve the actual structures of our schools is to include the upkeep costs in the budget and actually stick to the budget, not trying to override tax caps to fix all of the buildings. It should already be in the budget, and the money should be spent appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman.
Thank you very much. I recall almost 4 years ago when Senator Cataldo was driving me into Concord with him for my swearing-in ceremony. And something he said that day stuck with me for the next 2 years. And that is simply this: the devil is in the details. never vote for a bill until you've read it and understood all aspects of the bill. So I cannot give a commitment on the question because I need to see a bill, and I need to see a good bill first.
Thank you. Representative Keynes.
Well, for the first time all evening, I'm agreeing with my opponent. The devil is always in the details, but I did not support removing building aid from the state budget, and I would certainly be very positive about adding it in, depending on what else was in the bill with it.
Thank you. Representative Ellis.
I think it needs a committee study because it's pretty complicated.
Thank you. Representative Hubbard.
I would have to see a bill, but I certainly have seen in my years here in New Hampshire that what the state taketh away, the state rarely giveth back. So I'd be very surprised if the state would be willing to cough up that money when they've gotten away with not doing it. But I would have to look at a bill.
Ms. Higgins.
I would be cautiously optimistic about something, about the building aid bill. Look at what happened to the Gonick School, very unexpected emergency repairs needed. So I think I would have to look at the bill and see how it was worded and how it was stated.
Thank you. Mr. Minahan.
At first glance, I'd say I'd probably be open to this, but I think I'd also have to say that before I committed to supporting this restoration of the building aid, I'd really have to see the details, really have to see the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Can.
I mean, public safety is crucial, and we have an older town, older buildings, so we have to invest in building safety. And I would imagine that the state would be the best source of that instead of burdening our already burdened city. So I would say that yes, likely, but again, I will defer to the experience of others that says that you definitely want to make sure you read the bill first before you commit.
Thank you. Representative Grassi.
I was going to say a very quick answer that I could answer this. Most definitely, I would encourage reinstatement of the state building aid, but I think that something that's even more important here as well is understanding how building aid works. That this is something that I would expect Representative McNally to be supporting because it encourages districts to work together. The more districts that come together to build a school, a regional school that takes in other school districts as well, the more money you get. So it's a benefit to the local communities to have building aid and to have the districts working together. I'm in favor of it.
Thank you. Councilor Lautenborn.
As I said in an answer to an earlier question, I believe that that public education is primarily a state responsibility, and that the state of New Hampshire should overall be paying a larger share of the costs of our public schools. In terms of specifically the school building aid, I think I would have to put that in the context of all school aid and see where the greatest impact can be made.
Thank you. Representative Fontenot.
Thank you. Yeah, my initial thought was, yes, I'll promise to support that. But then I'll defer to the others' comments that I believe that I go over, I read every bill, I listen to the debate, and I make a final decision on the bill. But barring some unforeseen crazy addition there, I think it's very important that the state reinstate the school building aid fund to the local city. It will directly help our property tax rates.
Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that will conclude the state representative portion of our candidates forum. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for participating this evening. And more importantly, I wish all of you the very best of luck on Tuesday, November 6th. And at this time, we're going to take a very, very brief 5-minute recess. We're going to change and get ready for the State Senate Forum for District 6. Once again, thank you to our media representatives, and we'll be right back. brought to you by the Greater Rochester Chamber of Commerce. I am now pleased to introduce to you the state Senate candidates for District 6. Starting to my right, we have the incumbent state senator, Mr. Jim Gray. And to my left, we have the challenger, Ann Grassi. So once again, we will have a series of questions from our media panel who are joining us today. Again, we have Mr. Kyle Stucker of Foster's Daily Democrat, Mr. Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice, and Mr. Dave Andreessen of 98.1 WTSN. Questions from the media panel will be conducted by alternating media representatives to alternating candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer questions. Again, our official timekeeper will display a timer on the monitors to my left and right, and candidates are asked to watch the time. Candidates should pay close attention to the timer and conclude their remarks immediately upon their time elapsing, and that will be signaled by the ringing of the bell. Right there. Perfect. So, to start off, we will start with Mr. Kyle Stucker of Foster's Daily Democrat with the first question going to, we're going to start with opening remarks. How's that sound? Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks. You are ready to go. Thank you. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks, and through a series of straw drawings, we have determined that Ms. Ann Grassi will go first, followed by Senator Gray. So 2 minutes, Ms. Grassi.
I was just going to compliment you on your great moderating, TJ.
And I blew it.
Thank you to the Chamber for hosting this forum, and thank you to the panel for thinking up thoughtful questions. I'm Ann Grassi. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandmom of 18, by the way. I've lived here since I was 12. I went and graduated from Spalding High School, and I've graduated from Granite State College with a degree in early childhood education and in behavioral science. I've spent 3 decades in early childhood education, 20 years as a state rep from Rochester, 17 years on the school board. I've had a lifetime of working to make life better for Granite State families and children. I'm running for the Senate to continue that work, to fight for education, workforce development, family-friendly economy policies, and child care access. Families are my platform. I started as a stay-at-home mom who took care of other people's children when my children were little. Then I worked for the school department, Rochester Child Care Center, Dover Children's Center, and I'm now currently back at Rochester Child Care Center. I'm serving as the Child Care Advisory Council Chair for the state of New Hampshire at the moment. I serve on the board of Somersworth Early Learning Child Care. I have 9 years on the board of New Hampshire Children's Trust, the lead agency against abuse and neglect of children in the state. I'm a founding member of SELA, which is the Seacoast Early Learning Alliance, which is a child care alliance to help people save money on back-of-the-house items to put more quality into the classrooms. From these experiences, I've learned that we're going to give the best care to Granite State children and families. We need to develop our workforce so that families are able to provide for their children and that their children can stay in New Hampshire when they're old enough to work for themselves. We need to work for education. We need a stronger definition of adequate. We need to fight for our public schools and our educational system, pre-K through college.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Gray.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chamber, City of Rochester for the venue, and thank you to the voters who are paying attention to this. I am Senator James P. Gray. I am seeking re-election to the Senate District 6, which includes Rochester, Alton, Barnstead, Farmington, Gilmanton, and New Durham. Just for you Rochester people, you're not the only ones I represent. My background, graduated from St. Thomas Aquinas High School, where I met my wife of 48 years, Joanne Callahan Gray. Served in the Army after graduating from high school, went to Vietnam. When I got out of the service, I worked at Simplex down in Newington. I started out mopping floors and watching cable go onto the reels. From there, I got a job in the electronics shop there. I got my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Started working at the shipyard, where I was part of the management team that saved the shipyard from closure. Worked at the Naval Sea Systems Command for 2 years at the end of my career, setting up a new office down there. Since then, I've been a state legislator, a state senator, and I've also been on the school board, city council. Currently am serving various positions for the Senate, including a trustee to the university system of New Hampshire. In the Senate this year, we've balanced the budget without new taxes or fees. We've cut business taxes, lowered the unemployment rate, with the fastest growing economy in New England, increased the rainy day fund, $36.8 million for cities and towns for roads and bridges, and funded school security projects for keeping our students safe. Please re-elect me.
Thank you. Now, we will turn it over to our esteemed media panel, starting with Mr. Kyle Stucker of Foster's Daily Democrat, with the question going to Senator Gray.
So, given your extensive careers and experience dealing with education issues, it shouldn't be a surprise that our first question for you is related to education. Just wondering if both of you could speak to the current education funding system, given the challenges it's imposed at the local level here, and what you would do, if anything, to change that to make it equitable both to taxpayers and to protect the interests of students.
Well, certainly there are people like Executive Counselor Valinsky, who believes that the current funding system is inadequate and never will be adequate until there is a broad-based tax in New Hampshire. I have discussed with many of my colleagues whether or not the sustainability grants should be changed so that there is no longer a 4% reduction, possibly a 1% reduction, or changing the formula on how to calculate what schools would get on that. And those discussions are ongoing right now. But it's important to remember that some of this for the school funding actually started back in 2007, 8, 9, and 10, when people who were in the legislature at that time voted in a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate with a Democratic governor to start reducing the retirement system.
Thank you. Mrs. Grassi.
Thank you. I think the stabilization grants that are provided to the communities, reducing them, right now it's set to reduce at 4% for the next 20 years. I think that's what's hurt Rochester. You heard earlier tonight that the 3 years of the reductions equaled the tax cap override. If we could have not had those to deal with, we would have solved our budget problems ourselves. The retirement system being neglected by the state as well has cost communities like Rochester. We do need to look at the disparity across the state of the value of properties in your town enables you to raise property taxes, the property tax per child. If you have a mountain or a lake in your town, that's really good news for you. But for communities like ours that don't have those natural features, we have more difficulty raising the property tax per child. So we need to look at how you can do this fairly across the state. It should be, no zip codes should determine how a child's quality of education is delivered.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Harrison Thorpe, and it'll be directed to Mrs. Grassi.
Yes, Ms. Grassi. The ACLU and several media outlets have been pushing to make a list of police officers with credibility problems public. Some of the offenses listed include dishonesty, sexual harassment, falsifying reports, excessive force, and deliberately lying during a court case. Many public officials guilty of malfeasance or wrongdoing can be removed for such transgressions. Most would say the actions allegedly committed by these police officers is blatantly unacceptable. How do you come down on this delicate subject, personnel records sanctity versus protecting the public from bad cops?
That's a very tough issue. I certainly don't want, you know, in any situation, you have bad actors, any employment situation, you have bad actors, and you have to trust your administrative teams to root those out, to have police officers that shouldn't be working for us, have them moved out of that field. I don't think I'd want to see the records, which have up till now maintained a privacy aspect to them, their personnel records. I don't think you could just open those up to public scrutiny all at once. I think it's something that the state needs to look at and discuss how to maybe going forward not have that kind of thing happen. But there should be a way to meet a compromise in the middle.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
I don't see this as a legislative issue. First of all, it's we're dealing with the personnel records of these officers, and that there is control of these officers through the police department here in Rochester, through the police chief. And I believe that it is between, or I should say, the police chief to actually take a look at these records, see what action should be taken. I can tell you that I know of departments in the state where action have been taken on some of these individuals, but because of the personal nature of these items, certainly I would not divulge any of the names.
Thank you. All right, our next question will be from Mr. Dave Andreessen of 98.1 WTSN, and it'll be directed to Senator Gray.
Senator Gray, New Hampshire has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, yet many businesses say they can't fill every position because they don't have enough qualified candidates to fill those positions. Is this something that, what are some things that the legislature could do, the state senate could do, to attract qualified candidates to New Hampshire to fill these jobs?
The legislature is taking lots of different actions. The most publicized is probably the Army initiative over in Manchester, where we are trying to develop a hub for that particular technology there. And we are actually attracting people, highly qualified people from all over the country. We have an advanced manufacturing committee. We have a pre-engineering committee, which talks to the STEM education programs and getting that in. In the last legislature, we actually, for vocational education, we're actually opening that up down to the sophomore level, where it was limited to juniors and above in most cases beforehand. We are doing the things that we can to get more people to stay here in the state. I worked on a committee with the Department of Labor and the Unemployment Office to look at getting students who had left the state for education purposes to come back, and more efforts.
Thank you. Representative Grassi?
Thank you. I think it's attracting people to the state. You want to have a good economy. If you want to have a good economy, you've got to pay attention to your school systems. We need to have investment in our school systems. We need to collaborate between our high schools and our community colleges, very similar to the way Great Bay College is collaborating with Spalding High School here to train some children that will be able to go into a local business, Albany Saffron, for example. They're learning the composites during their senior year. They will graduate with a degree, their high school degree, and they'll have 24 credits of an associate's degree and an interview at Albany Saffron. So we need to do more of these innovative, creative kinds of things to create a workforce that's trained and ready to go to work.
Thank you. All right, our next question is going to come from the audience, and it will be addressed to Representative Grassi, followed by a response by Senator Gray. The question reads, what would you do to address the downshifting of costs from the state to the local level?
Stop doing it. I think you have to look very carefully when you're at the state legislation or Senate area to be careful not to do things that cost the local community, and we do a lot of that in this state. We've hurt our counties by downshifting costs to our counties. The situation with the jails and with the rest homes is very difficult with the state stepping back. They're constantly stepping back. They've stepped back in the area of education. We need to hold our state accountable for things that it should be helping with. So there are some things that are just easier for the state to manage, school building aid being one of them. This is health and safety for where we place our students, for where we place all our children. We have infrastructure that's crumbling in almost every county in the state for schools that need help, need the building aid. So those kinds of things cost the taxpayer lots of dollars.
Senator Gray?
Certainly, I agree with Representative Grassi about holding people accountable. In the 2007, 8, 9, and 10 legislatures, when both the House and the Senate were controlled by the Democratic Party and with Democratic governor, we started reducing the amount that the state was paying for the retirement system. And we also increased the budget by 25% over those 4 years during a period of decline. Those issues left the state at the end of those 4 years with an $800 million deficit. And we're still trying to work our way out of that. And we should go, and as the representative said, we should hold those representatives accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next question will come from Kyle Stucker, and it will be addressed to Senator Gray.
So, Senator, you raise an interesting point there in that comment in your opening. There's a lot of political tribalism in politics right now, a lot of talk about nonpartisanship, whereas the parties have a tendency to vote along party lines pretty frequently. Can you give us an example of a bill that you haven't acted on yet that you would actually vote against your party platform to support? And can you also give us an example of a time where you've done that in the past to give us a better sense of how you would work across the aisle?
There's all kinds of different bills where I have voted in opposition to the party. I put in a bill that had to do with the register of probate that many in my party did not support, trying to make sure that the average citizen can go in without an attorney and actually litigate a probate case. Right now that there was not a lot of support in my own party for that. So there's other examples out there. Each individual bill, I review it and make my own personal decision on it. It is not unusual that people who have the same philosophy and the same caring for one particular side, as in, that we believe that the businesses are the way to increase jobs, which will increase the economy, which will provide a family-friendly economy, as opposed to people who want to tax and tax and tax.
Representative Grassi.
That's a really tough question. My first thought for a bill, no matter if it's a Republican bill or a Democratic bill, is how it affects the families that I represent here in Rochester. I see lots of families, struggling young families, every day in my work. And I think first and foremost, would this bill help them or hurt them? It's not necessarily a party issue for me when I'm voting on legislation. I can't think of one in which I was opposed to the Democratic. I'm sure there were bills. I didn't always vote straight party line. But to me, it's important to support the families that I represent in Rochester. What is good for them? What is good for their children? What is going to help build an economy here that keeps them here and keeps our families growing? Those are the issues that I look at when I'm looking at legislation.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Harrison Thorpe, and it will be directed to Representative Grassi.
Representative Grassi, would you ever consider pushing for New Hampshire to become a sanctuary state, or for New Hampshire to allow its individual cities or towns within the state to declare themselves sanctuaries for illegal immigrants?
I don't know that I would be on the forefront of pushing for New Hampshire to become a sanctuary state. I think that we are a welcoming state. We have a lot of refugee population in some of our big cities, and they become very successful parts of those communities. I think you have to look at each group that's coming here for sanctuary, the reasons why. You know, are they in imminent threat of losing their lives if they stay where they are? I think this idea of calling a city a sanctuary city, it's up to the city governing body to decide whether they want to do that. I would have to, if Rochester were to do that, to try to do that, I would have to look at the situation of the immigration to Rochester, why they were coming, why they would want to be here. For most part, our immigrants in our bigger cities have. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? I don't know if I heard you answer the question. Would you allow New Hampshire to allow individual cities and towns to declare themselves sanctuary cities or towns? Would you vote for that?
Would I allow New Hampshire to allow cities?
Individual cities.
Individual cities?
The question was, would you vote to push to have New Hampshire be a sanctuary state, or would you allow New Hampshire to pass a bill that would allow individual cities or towns within the state to declare themselves individually sanctuary cities or towns?
I think that would take a vote of the entire legislature to declare the state a sanctuary state. But to allow a city to call itself a sanctuary city, I think that would be up to the city. I would leave that up to the cities and towns of themselves.
Right, thank you. Senator Gray?
I am not in favor of the state being a sanctuary state. I am not in favor of towns or cities being sanctuaries. I think that if we look down to what's happening in Mexico right now, and the people who are marching across Mexico, that there is going to be serious problems down at the border. I believe that the federal government, both the Republicans and the Democrats, need to resolve the issues that we have right now. Certainly, if you look at the issue of dreamers and you look at the issue of people who came across the border as an adult, that those issues need to be resolved. Whether or not someone is offered citizenship now, in the future, whether they have to leave the country or come back. Again, those aren't state issues, but for the issue that you did ask about, whether or not to have sanctuary cities, towns, or state, I am not in favor of that.
Thank you. All right, our next question will be from Mr. Andreessen, and it will be directed to Senator Gray.
Senator Gray, the governor's come out in the past couple days opposed to legalizing recreational marijuana. Is the state losing out on the reluctance from the legislature to legalize recreational marijuana?
Is the state losing out? Well, first of all, let's go and look at what my opinion is on it. Marijuana, I supported the legalization of medical marijuana. I supported reducing it, from down to a violation for small amounts. But I do not want to legalize it. I do want to have the federal government take it off of the Schedule I list. When marijuana is a Schedule I drug, which means it has no medicinal purpose, and heroin and cocaine would fit into the Schedule II category from the derivatives that are on there, we've got a problem. We've got a big problem. There has not been adequate research done on marijuana. Why? because it's a Schedule I drug, and the people who would do the research haven't been able to. Double-blind tests and other things haven't been able to be done on the marijuana. We get people in the legislature saying, I would like it to use marijuana for, and there's no data.
Representative Grassi.
Could you restate the question?
So the governor has come out in the past couple days in an editorial and said that he would not vote for recreational marijuana. And also, do you think that the state is losing out by not by having the legislature reluctant to approve recreational marijuana?
We may be losing out. It depends on how the legislature would want to legalize it. They want to regulate it, or do they want to tax it? You know, we're certainly losing on tax revenues if that's the goal of legalizing marijuana. The states to our west, east, and south, and the country to our north have all legalized marijuana. It kind of puts us in a very strange situation, an island in the middle. I think I agree with Senator Gray on the fact that it's a Schedule I drug, and research and data hasn't been collected on it. I think part of the issue with driving under the influence of marijuana could be solved if we could have the research done on it. That would ease my mind about legalizing it. It's the under the influence effect that we need to know what's going to happen when people get out on the roads under the influence of any particular drug.
Thank you. All right. Our next question. Did I give you a chance to answer that one? I'm sorry. Or did that go to
He
you
was
first?
first.
Thank you. So the next question is coming from the audience. It will be addressed to Representative Grassi. My apologies.
Okay.
The question states, the state legislature has enacted comprehensive standards for an adequate education, but the amount of aid the state provides to meet these standards is woefully insufficient. Rochester receives quote-unquote stabilization grant, although this grant is being reduced by 4% each year, downshifting more onto the taxpayers as an immediate measure. Would you support a moratorium on cuts to the stabilization grants? And would you support restoring the amount that has been cut since 2015?
I definitely would support a moratorium on the cuts to the stabilization grant. That is just going to put us behind the eight ball every budget season for the school budget. We need to look at this. We need to come up with creative solutions for funding education. My goal would be that it would be fair and equitable across the state, no matter where a child lives, no matter what zip code. 77% of our children in this state live in communities that have a below average ability to raise tax dollars per child. 77%. If 77% of the legislature could get together, I'm sure they could come up with a better solution to education funding.
Thank you. Senator Gray.
The stabilization grant in Rochester, I believe, started out around $877 million a year. Since then, not only Rochester, but other communities have complained about that. And in one of the prior questions, I addressed that a little bit, that I just had a conversation today with the chair of the Education Committee in the House about doing something different. Those conversations are just starting. So do I support doing something? Yes. What? I can't tell you yet, because we haven't gotten there. If I look at Executive Counselor Andrew Valinsky, property taxes will never, ever be the way to fund education. What does that leave you with? A sales tax? Income tax?
Thank you. Our next question will be directed to Senator Gray, and it will come from Mr. Kyle Stucker.
Homelessness is on the rise across Rochester and other parts of the county, seacoast, and other parts of the country. Experts have attributed it to several factors, but the largest is housing. In terms of funding, policies, and solutions, what do you believe should be done?
Homelessness is quite an interesting thing when you actually sit down and go and talk to the people in the welfare department who have been out at some of these various sites offering housing certificates, either temporarily or otherwise, to these people, and they have refused. So, you know, we may call them chronically homeless. Some of those we actually did get to come in during the winter last time when we had the shelter here. So, you know, to look at Rochester, we just, through the planning board and the housing authority, are going to open, after some renovations, 8 units that for chronically housing people. So there's a lot of things that are going on. Some of them, like I say, right down at the welfare. When we had the march here and they were pitching tents outside, I asked the city manager to make sure the welfare was there to provide assistance that they could.
Thank you. Representative Grassi?
I think part of the housing issue with homeless people, I mean, it's hard for young 20-year-olds to find affordable housing. To move out from mom and dad and find an apartment is extraordinary right now. The cost for housing is really high. I think with the homeless population, part of our problem here is not addressing mental health issues accurately enough and not having enough systems in place to help people who are having mental health issues. A lot of the homeless have left their families, they've left their housing situation where they were because of mental health issues. They just don't fit in, they don't fit into society anywhere, they have trouble maintaining a job, they can't take care of themselves. We need to address our mental health issues in the state and find more support for helping people stay employed, stay healthy, and find housing for them.
All right, our next question will be from Harrison Thorpe, and it will go to Representative Grassi.
Representative Grassi, the New Hampshire legislative action prohibits local jurisdictions from adopting sprinkler requirements for new 1 and 2 family homes outside at any time. But if you see the Rochester Fire Department's mandate for cisterns, do you see the City of Rochester Fire Department's mandate for cisterns outside the fire hydrant district as an effort to frustrate the state statute, given that a sprinkler system is often less expensive than a cistern, and the department offers up a sprinkler option in lieu of the more costly cisterns? Secondly, do you think this hurts the city's ability to create workforce and middle-class housing options?
I think code enforcement is always a little bit ahead of our housing, our building group, and it makes interesting concerns for construction workers. We want to have homes that are safe. We want to have prevention of fire in homes is utmost with the fire department, I'm sure. I think we need to have a lot more conversation when codes are contemplated and put into play for local communities. We need to see what impact it has before it actually goes in. We don't want to have dangerous situations, but we've had 1 and 2 family homes for a lot of years without a lot of major fires. I think we have to be careful how we're impacting the construction field and the housing field as well.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
The question is quite interesting. If we're actually trying to build workforce housing that, these people who are working at, less than, I'll choose the $15 that my opponent would choose, you're not going to do it with 1 and 2 family houses. You're going to have to do it with small, maybe studio apartments built on a large scale with a very high density, in the city. Certainly cisterns or a storage tank or a pond with are all things that I pushed at the city council meeting to make sure that the deputy fire chief talked about, because cisterns aren't just one item, okay? So, again, if we're going to say 1 and 2 family, then do we need something? Well, if the fire truck gets out there and they don't have any water, there's a problem.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Mr. Andreessen, and it will be directed to Senator Gray.
Senator Gray, do you think it's expensive for companies to conduct business in New Hampshire? For example, some have complained about the high energy costs. Is New Hampshire business friendly, and is there anything that you think that you could do to attract more businesses moving here? We're not talking workers now. We're talking making it easier for businesses.
New Hampshire has several things that make it more difficult for us than other communities to be able to attract people. Other states can use state dollars to do many things in site preparation or, educating or other things that would help businesses. So business taxes, which we've reduced twice now, and are going, there's 2 more scheduled to go, helps. And the high energy cost is a problem. So where do we go with that? If I'm talking about electricity, bringing it down through, the upper part of the state, not in my backyard. If I'm trying to bring gas up from the south, south is saying, no, not in my backyard. So, there needs to be some compromises. One of the ideas is the Liberty thing, where they're going to put a tank down to store natural gas.
Thank you. Representative Grassi?
I think New Hampshire struggles to be business-friendly. I think we have the highest energy costs in the state. I think we need to start looking at renewables. We do need to get the cost of electricity down, not only for businesses, but for school systems and for families. Electric costs are very high here. And I think that could make a high-energy use business think twice about coming here. But I think if we would look forward to developing our renewables, looking at other forms of energy, New Hampshire is ripe for this kind of an industry. It would create jobs. It would help our economy. It would attract business. I mean, just the business of the renewable energy itself. The school district here has we're relighting all of our school buildings with energy-saving light bulbs. It's going to save us in the area of $130,000 once we purchase them and get them installed on our electric usage.
Thank you. Next question will be directed to Representative Grassi from Kyle Stucker.
Could you we have a couple of constitutional amendments on the ballot next month. Just wondering if each of you could outline your positions for those amendments and give our local voters a little bit better understanding where you might fall on those.
I wish I could. They are not clear. They're very difficult to read. I'm not positive what either of them would have for unintended consequences. The one on the privacy, the state protecting the privacy of each individual, I think could be problematic in instances of records that might be necessary to be shared. I'm not really in favor of either one at this moment. I'd like to know a lot more detail and know what the unintended consequences of these amendments.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
Thank you. After the forum is over, I'll hand Representative Grassi a copy of the two amendments. Right now, the first one has to do with standing in the court. If you're a taxpayer and you don't like what's going on, and it has to do with a financial issue, there was a court decision that said that a taxpayer does not have standing to do that, and that happened around 2014. There's a lot of information on the website about that. The Senate voted 22-2, and the House voted 309-9. Every one of those people that voted against it was a Democrat, but as you can see, there was a lot of Democrats that did vote for it. The second one has to do with adding a right to the Constitution, that you have a right to privacy. That can open up other legislation if that is passed into law. That one was not passed by as big a margin.
Thank you. All right. Our next question will be from Harrison Thorpe, directed to Senator Gray.
Senator Gray, we've talked a lot about homelessness tonight. We've also talked a lot about the opioid problem. Let's tackle the triad of added to with the mental health issues in the state. Is there anything that you can think of to that would be cost effective and efficient and actually work to try to help bring about some changes in the way we treat people with mental health issues, such as the log jam at some of the state hospitals and the shortage of beds in Concord?
During the last legislative session, between the first and the second year, we had nearly 60 beds to the various portions. One of the problems at the state hospital is that patients who are ready to be released from the hospital don't have a transitional place to go. And we added in legislation 20 beds for that. There were some problems with that actually getting implemented. We went back in at the request of Health and Human Services, did a little bit of tweaking on what they call the Christmas tree bill. I think it's House Bill 113, and don't quote me, I'm just doing that off the top of my head. But we also added other things. We made a provision for another mobile unit for people in crisis. Those changes right now haven't had as big an effect on the waiting list that's in the hospital right now, and we will continue to look at that, and with the help of Health and Human Services, figure out what to do next.
Representative Grassi.
Thank you. I think one of the problems we have with the mental health and the opioid, not enough residential care in the state, not enough places for people to be, and these are long-term fixes. This is not something you can go in and fix in 12 weeks or even 24 weeks. These take time, and we don't have enough capacity to handle the caseloads that we're seeing now. When people have to wait in a hospital emergency room to be seen or for a bed to open somewhere for 20 days, that is a real problem. That is as a result of downshifting to the communities. We've wanted these people to be handled by the care facilities in their own communities, stay at home where they have family and friends. Most communities don't have the ability to care for the numbers we're seeing. We need to train more professionals. I think a lot of our accessibility to recovery is lack of professionals.
Thank you. Next question will be from Dave Andreessen to Representative Grassi.
Representative Grassi, do you think New Hampshire has adequate gun laws? Do you think that we need more? Do you think that we need to scale back?
I think our gun laws need to be fixed. Not that there's enough or not enough, or I would like to see red flag laws. I'm concerned about people with mental health issues, not having someone with the ability to take their weapon for 24 to 48 hours until they don't feel quite the way they feel at the moment. I think that would be a big help. I also think we need to put back the permits for concealed carry. I think that at least lets the law enforcement in our communities know who has guns that are permitted to carry a concealed weapon. I think it's important for law enforcement to have that information. I'd like to see the age of purchase raised as well. I just think in the tragedies we've seen happen across the country, it's mostly a young man with a mental health issue that could have been intervened at some point. I just think that we need to look carefully at what we're allowing to protect our freedom to bear arms.
Thank you. Senator Gray?
Yes, I believe our laws are adequate. I do find it interesting that my opponent brought out the concealed carry. In New Hampshire, we've always had open carry without a permit. And the fact that I have a shirt on which is tucked into my pants so that the gun can be seen, or if I pull my shirt out of my pants and so that it actually covers the gun, doesn't seem to be a big distinction to me. And that's would be concealed carry if I untucked my shirt. Does that make sense? Part of the bump stock testimony that we received in the Senate was that with a piece of dowel and a rubber band, you can actually make the equivalent of a bump stock. Something where when the recoil comes, that the trigger will be repeatedly, pressed. So right now, I do believe that they're adequate.
Thank you very much. All right, we have time for one more question from the audience, and this will conclude the question portion of this evening's forum, and then we'll move to closing remarks. This question says, last year, the governor signed a bill into law that increased state funding for kindergarten by $1,100 per student starting next year. If you are an incumbent, did you support this bill? And if not, would you have supported this bill? And I will start that one to Senator Gray.
The kindergarten funding with Keno took what was half-day adequacy for a kindergarten student, because that's what the state required is half-day, and changed it to that you would get a full-day equivalency, which means that the $1,800 that they would get for half adequacy would be actually doubled for those students. In the district, we have Rochester, which has full-day kindergarten, Farmington, which last I knew still had half-day kindergarten and was looking at what they were going to do with that. I have asked a couple of people up there to check and see if there's been any movement, because I haven't been notified of any. But yes, I did support the bill. I think that the first year or two would have been better to actually spend the money to encourage those communities who did not have full-day kindergarten to actually do the building or whatever needed so that they would have it.
Representative Grassi.
Thank you. I was not an incumbent, so I could not have voted for this bill, but I certainly would have. I can remember when we talked about adequacy when I was a state rep, and that kindergarten wasn't being supported. I was totally in favor of that being added to the rest of the school system, that they would get the money for kindergarten kids. Kindergarten's one of the most important years of your schooling. It's when you get a really good start, a really good love for school. Good kindergarten experience can help a child stay in school and succeed at school. So it is much needed, but the adequacy is not adequate. We just need to fix that. It's not enough for our school systems.
Thank you very much. All right, that now takes us to the closing remarks, and we will start with Senator Gray and followed by Representative Grassi. And each candidate will have 1 minute.
We've talked about a lot of things here this evening, but there's a lot of things out there that, that we didn't touch on. We didn't touch on what is the state's obligation to educate students who don't attend a public school. One of the things that Councilor Valinsky passed out was a copy of the Supreme Court decision that says we did not construe the term shall have a duty to cherish in our Constitution the merits, merely a statement of appreciation. Language commands that in no uncertain terms, that the state provide an education to all of its citizens. And that's right out of the decision. It does go on to talk about public schools thereafter. But we have the obligation to educate all of our students. A homeschool student, other students, why should they be excluded? It's time to vote. Thank you.
Representative Grassi?
Thank you. One of the things I was going to say in my opening and didn't get a chance to because I obviously wrote too many words, was we needed to support our educational system pre-K through college so that all children have an equal chance at an excellent education, no matter their zip code. We need to do better by our teachers. We need to support our working parents with better wages and benefits like paid family leave so we can grow our economy. That is the goal here, to grow our economy. We need to do more to care for grandparents who are now raising their grandchildren because of the opioid epidemic. At my center where I work, I've seen at least 25 sets of grandparents this year that are raising toddlers because they've been touched by the horrendous opioid tragedy. It's really awful what it's doing to families. We need to do better by our local recovery centers, increase treatment options and access for care. Also protect the children who are affected by these issues. Please vote for me on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, and before we conclude, I do want to just thank a lot of individuals and groups that have helped us tonight, starting with the City of Rochester for allowing to use the City Council chambers this evening in their facilities. I want to thank Tim Kremen of Kremen Creative for a great job behind the board once again, and as always. Special thanks to Atlantic Broadband for rebroadcasting this forum several times prior to the November 6th election. I'd like to thank the Rochester Government Channel and Celeste Playa for the use of the equipment. I'd like to thank the Chamber of Commerce staff for coordinating tonight's event, and especially Chamber President Laura Ring, who did a wonderful job organizing everything. We'd like to thank our illustrious timekeeper, Mr. Matt Bollier of Service Credit Union, for a job well done keeping us on track tonight. I'd like to also thank Blaine Cox, who was in the back office receiving questions from the public and bringing them out to us this evening. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending tonight's forum and all of you who have submitted questions this evening. And as always, we definitely wouldn't have had as much fun as we did if it wasn't for our media panel, Mr. Kyle Stucker of Foster's Daily Democrat, Mr. Harrison Thorpe of the Rochester Voice, and Mr. Dave Andreessen of 98.1 WTSN. We thank you all for joining us once again, and most importantly, thank you to the candidates for their willingness to run for office, and we wish them both the very best of luck on November 6th, and I encourage all of you to please vote on Tuesday, November 6th. Polls will be open in Rochester from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Thank you all. Have a great night.